New Icy Hot. Nighttime recovery. Relieves pain at nighttime while your body recovers. Icy Hot. You're so back.
Netflix has a new, monstrous story to tell. In 1950s Wisconsin, Ed Gein lived quietly on a decaying farm, hiding a house of horrors so gruesome it would redefine the American nightmare. Driven by isolation, psychosis, and an all-consuming obsession with his mother, he committed crimes that would haunt Hollywood for decades. The third and most harrowing installment of Ryan Murphy and Ian Brennan's anthology series. Watch Monster, the Ed Gein story, October 3rd, only on Netflix.
This episode is brought to you by Nature's Bounty. Nature's Bounty believes your body is brilliant, naturally designed to thrive, inside and out. For those always looking for new ways to support your health from head to heels, Nature's Bounty has a range of over 400 vitamins and supplements born from 50 years of trust and care. Nature's Bounty. It's in your nature. Visit naturesbounty.com to learn more.
Welcome to Away the Podcast. It's Martin here, and today you join us for yet another episode of On This Week, where we look back at some of the significant and not so significant events that took place on this week in the history of Sunderland AFC. And for the second week in a row, we actually have our full lineup with us today. So first of all, we'll say hello to Chris Wynn.
Hello, mate. Yes, and you know what that means? It usually means another epic when the gang's back together, doesn't it?
Well, see, everybody who's listening has the benefit that we don't have. They can see how long we've recorded for, can't they? So they'll know.
And they've got the benefit of being able to do it in chunks.
Be able to do it in chunks, fast forward things, skip back on things, so lucky listeners. Also with us, you can hear him chuckling in the background. It's Kelvin Beattie. Hello, Kelvin.
Morning, chaps. What a pleasure it is to be here.
Always a pleasure, isn't it? Always.
It is.
And last but not least, it is Andrew Smithson. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, mate. Like Kelvin says, it's a pleasure to be here, and I just feel for all those poor pets in the Wearside area who, when their owners take them out for a walk and get listening to one of our podcasts, the dog doesn't get home for like 3 or 4 hours, and it's absolutely knackered. So we've got a lot to answer for.
Yeah, I just see all of these vets going, God, why are all these dogs losing weight? What's going on? We might have actually solved that conundrum for them.
Our lass nearly sent the mountain rescue out for me the other day on that last one.
You can do a few laps, can't you? Well, we will get straight into it. So we are covering the week starting the 29th of September. And we are going all of the way back to 1894 to start off with, because Johnny Campbell, legendary centre-forward for Sunderland, scored his 100th league goal in just his 102nd league game. That came in a 4-1 defeat at Bolton. And it remains the fastest, I think, that any Sunderland player has scored 100 goals, which is a quite remarkable feat.
I was just going to say about Johnny Campbell, one of the things I always like about him, when you look at photos of the team of all talents, he's the one that's lounging. He's always sort of filled out and sort of just like, given the kind of player that he was, it always seems at odds with how I imagine him.
Probably lulled the opposition defence into a false sense of security with his lackadaisical attitude, maybe. I always remember, that's what people used to tell me when I played as a striker. Pretend you're not interested. Look, just gaze around. Look over there. Look here, there, and everywhere. Then go into action. You lull the defenders into a false sense of security. It'll work now and again.
You've still got that reputation in the concert area, Martin.
Yeah. Among other things as well. 1929, another very famous Sunderland striker, Charlie Buchan, and we've talked about Charlie Buchan on a few podcasts before now, but he scored a hat-trick versus Man City. Sunderland won 5-2. And Albert McIntyre, goalkeeper, who we've mentioned now and again, he made his debut in that game. And there's a theme emerging here, because another person who we spoke at length about a couple of weeks ago, Jim Baxter, he was born on the 29th of September 1939. 1987, now there's definitely a theme emerging here, because last week we waxed lyrical about Marco Gabbiadini and provided some counselling to each other about his departure back in 1991. 1987, this was the game at Craven Cottage against Fulham. So Marco had made his debut against Chester City the week before at Roker Park. We'd got beaten 2-0, I think. Went to Fulham. It must have been the midweek. It was a night game, wasn't it? I remember. And Marco opened the scoring in the first minute, and he also scored on the 90th minute to seal a 2-0 win. In the year 2000, Darren Holloway became the first player that we transferred to Wimbledon for a fee of 1.25 million. Now, I got my book out here, and I was trying to work out who was the first player that we signed from Wimbledon.
I've got a shout. I'm gonna jump in there, and I'm gonna potentially say John Kay.
John Kay.
I think it was John Kay. We've had a few players who've played for both clubs before John Kay signed for Sunderland, but Dave Swindlehurst was one. I think did he play for Wimbledon before he signed for us or after? And Wayne Entwistle also played for Wimbledon after he left Sunderland.
Right.
But I reckon John Kay is the first one that we signed from Wimbledon.
There's a good story in Dennis Smith's book about that signing John Kay, because he talks to Dave Bassett, and apparently he's like, basically, what's the lad like? And he said, John Kay obviously being from Sunderland, and he was at Arsenal before Wimbledon. And Dennis Smith says to Dave Bassett, what's the lad like? He said, well, put it this way, he moved to Wimbledon from Arsenal to be closer to home.
Well,
go on, lad.
Technically.
Dennis Smith said he'll do for me. Moved from North London to South London to be closer to home. There you go.
Dave Swindlehurst, this is quite interesting. I didn't realise this about him. So he played for us between 85 and 87, left Sunderland in 87 to go to a Cypriot team, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name of this team. In 1988, which is the season that Wimbledon won the FA Cup, he played for Wimbledon.
Ooh.
So he only made 2 appearances, but he was in the squad.
Well, it was interesting to listen to Kevin Day the other week. What a hero Swindlehurst was at Palace. Yeah, he's absolutely a hero, banging in the goals in the 70s.
Well, he started his career there, didn't he? So he had a good reputation after coming through the youth system.
Just quickly on Darren Holloway, very quickly. But I remember we did a podcast with him, and it's really bizarre when you kind of hear him talk through everything, because at the start of our second season in the Premier League, and if you look at the first few games in the first chunk of that season, Peter Reid was almost trying to turn Darren Holloway into a central midfielder. And he was almost saying, you're going to be our man in the middle of the park. And he was trying to change his position. And you look at the opening day of the season, of the 2000-2001 season, we beat Arsenal 1-0. And, they had Tony Adams, Martin Keown, Vieira, Henry, Carnu, Lundberg. There were some great players. Perez came on. Brilliant players in their team. We beat them 1-0 with a central midfield of Darren Holloway and Paul Thirlwell.
Yeah. I'd completely forgotten about Holloway playing in midfield. And there was a game I was looking at either for last week's podcast or the week before's. But yeah, he was playing in midfield. And when you start kind of then going through the teams for the games around that, you kind of start to remember him playing in midfield. But you wonder whether Reid was trying to sort of replicate what Kevin Ball had done for him.
Yeah.
So that tough tackling midfield player could provide that real sort of defensive solidity in centre midfield.
Yeah, but it was a typical Peter Reid thing, because again, going through the full thing with Holloway, he basically said, he was kind of right. Well, you're going to be our man in midfield, and Darren Holloway thought, right, okay, I'm in here, and then suddenly 1 minute he was in Flavour of the Month, and then he said next minute he was out, and then before he knew it, a bid had come in, and Peter Reid said, I've accepted this, and Darren Holloway was thinking, whoa, hang on, what's kind of happened here? But it was it was almost that trait that Peter Reid had, wasn't it? It just with a click of a fingers, you can be in or out.
And playing players out of position as well, which he was notorious for on occasion.
Yeah, it worked. 60% of the time it worked every time.
And talking about Peter Reid, that's a very seamless link because the year after 2001, Peter Reid was in charge as Sunderland went away to Bolton and won 2-0. Kevin Phillips and Jody Craddock got our goals, but Thomas Sorensen saved a Per Franson penalty on 65 minutes with the score at 0-0, and Sam Allardyce was in charge of Bolton that day, so it was an Allardyce versus Reid game. 2012, on the 29th of September, we beat Wigan at home 1-0. Stephen Fletcher got the goal, and in 2023, we played Sheffield Wednesday away at Hillsborough. Dan Ballard opened the scoring. Jack Clark got another 2 goals in the first half. This was a game that Jensen Silt made his debut. He came on as sub for Trey Hume with about 4 minutes left, just to see out the game. Now, also on the 29th of September, we're going to go back to 1971 because there was a game at Ayson Park. Sorry, no, there was a game at Roker Park, not Ayson Park. So we're going to go all the way back to 1971 for a game against Middlesbrough at Roker Park.
You had me panicking, Martin, there, because I thought, Ayson Park, hang on. I've gone wrong somewhere here. It was at Roker Park, and funnily enough, crowds around that time at Roker is something I wanted to touch on. As you mentioned, we played Middlesbrough 29th of September 1971. We'd played them on Boxing Day 1970 at home. So only, that's 9 months beforehand, and there was an attendance of 42,000. You fast forward to the date we're looking at now, and the crowd is only 28,000. Now, it's still a decent crowd. Highest league attendance that season and more than double the average. But it's still quite a drop from Boxing Day. I know Boxing Day you traditionally get a big crowd, but even still, what are you looking at there? There's about 14,000 drop in the space of a few months. And I think that sums up the era, not just at Sunderland AFC, but also in the region and in the country in general. There's a lot of financial and employment factors in the early 70s. You add that to the fact that the team are in a real lull. Crowds always drop when performances fall off a cliff. We'd finished mid-table the year before, so the mood around the club isn't brilliant. Form in general had been pretty weak as well. We'd been knocked out of the League Cup by Bristol Rovers, who were in a lower division. This Middlesbrough game was midweek. That might have also impacted the crowd. I mean, Kelvin, do you remember that game? Would you have been there? Do you think?
Yeah. I was at both them games that you were speaking about, and I think it's a fair point. It was a raucous crowd on the Boxing Day, but it was Boxing Day, and then literally the same opposition. It was a midweek game. It was I think if I've got the right game, it was a pretty, the weather wasn't great, but I think there's a combination of the economic climate at the time, plus this a little bit of sort of apathy with the team. We were flattering to deceive a little bit, Andrew, and Boro didn't. Midweek game, Boro weren't bringing many. They weren't contributing too many fans to that attendance that night. I definitely remember that. Yeah. It's a shame because they missed a bloody good game.
But this game comes off the back of the game on the Saturday, which is also at Roker Park. And it's a game that we've spoken about. It was a Preston 4-3 game where Jimmy Hamilton comes off the bench and scores. And there was, 13,000 or so at that game. So there's a significant increase from the Saturday to the Tuesday, I'm presuming.
Yeah. There was a bit of a jump in the crowd. That that Jimmy Hamilton game against Preston, we've spoken a couple of times about it, was a well-remembered occasion. That had been our first win in a while. So, there was a little bit of a increase in hope there, that we might be getting a bit of a springboard. Middlesbrough are local to us. We'll not go into the whether they're rivals or not conversation today, but they are fairly local. But even then, as Kelvin says, I don't think the away support was very good. And we still have this in 2025, where midweek games, if you're relying on public transport from outside the boundaries of Sunderland, it can be difficult to get to games.
They're as local as the Cornish pasty, Andrew.
Well, there still would have been officially North Yorkshire then, wouldn't there?
Of course, yes. Well, I'll tell you what, Chris. You drive down to get a Cornish pasty. I'll drive down to Middlesbrough. We'll see you. See you arrive first.
You haven't seen how fast I drive.
Fair dues, fair dues. You've got a head start because you're in Sheffield, of course, as well. I wasn't thinking. Right. One person who was expected to attend the game was Bobby Park. Now, he's a player we've mentioned before, and at the start of this season, that was when he had his horrific injury at home to Birmingham. The weather, again, was really foul that day. That was a match we spoke about. But on the day of the Middlesbrough match, he was due to get put into a new plaster, and the doctors were expected to let him go to the game. This was the first time since being injured that he was going to be allowed to go back to Roker Park and go and watch his teammates. So that will have been maybe bittersweet, you would say. Obviously, he wants to. He's a footballer. He wants to be going to games and be part of the atmosphere. But going back to the place where just a couple of months before you've had this horrific leg break in your football careers in the balance, that might have been a bit of an odd one. Kelvin, you wrote a really nice piece about this game last year, and if I've read it right, you watched the match from the full end as we we took on former player Stan Anderson's team. This is just classic 1970s Kelvin. You remember a dog getting onto the pitch, which is just that is just 70s football in a nutshell for me.
You don't see dogs getting on pitches much these days, do you?
No, it's not fair. Everybody everybody remembers a dog on the pitch, and everybody remembers when a dog comes into the schoolyard.
Did Dan Anderson blame that dog for is that the game where he said if the dog hadn't run on the pitch, we would have won the game?
There you go, Kelvin. You're saying, was that the game? Because dogs ran on pitches so many times, it was it could have been this match or a different one. No, in all seriousness, the dog getting onto the pitch did actually disrupt Middlesbrough. Whereas, and here comes a pun, whereas the black cats dealt with the dog rather better. Might have been funnier if I hadn't told there was a pun coming, but there you go. So yeah, interesting about the dog coming on. That does disrupt Middlesbrough quite a lot. Another thing you touched on in your article, Kelvin, if people want to dig this out, you mention Sunderland's Dave Watson and Middlesbrough's Bill Gates, who is brother of Eric Gates, of course. Since that game and in later years, they've had really unpleasant health conditions, and you touch on that in the article, Kelvin. It's worth digging it out and reading about that, because it is the sad side of football and what happens to players in later years.
That was one of the things as well. I mean, I don't suppose you see as much of that these days, but it was enthralling. You couldn't take your eyes off Bill Gates and Dave Watson. They could have been in a boxing ring. They seemed to constantly be clashing with each other in a in a gladiatorial kind of way. You know, they weren't hacking each other, they weren't missing each other, but they were. You know, it was a fantastic sort of ingredient to this game was their battle.
Well,
He was a
Bill,
canny hand, Bill Gates. If you're thinking of Eric, yeah, you're almost at the other end of the continuum with Bill. He was quite a big lad and really well built lad. He was a
so what you
canny
mean is,
footballer.
Kelvin, he wasn't falling down in the box at the drop of a hat. He was maybe a bit more
He was.
robust, shall we say?
Yeah,
Bill
well,
Gates.
not have a bad word said against Eric now. Come on.
It's not. I'm not slagging Gates off at all. He was brilliant for us, but the way you're describing his brother sounds he was a bit more
Yeah,
bit tougher, shall we say?
yeah.
When I looked at Bill Gates, and I realised I was looking at the Wikipedia of the footballer and not the billionaire. His middle name is also Lazenby. Eric
Oh,
Gates's
really?
Eric Gates's middle name was Lazenby, and that's always interested me.
Yeah.
But to see his brother's got the same middle name, I'm now assuming that Lazenby must be maybe the mother's original maiden name or something like that.
No.
I just thought they were really big James Bond fans.
Well, so did I. Yeah.
Sounds like laziness to me.
Ooh.
Chris just dropped that in and then is now just backed away from the mic, chuckling to himself. Right. Anyway,
I would drop the mic, but it's too expensive.
Right. We're trying to keep this episode nice and tight down to like 3 hours. Right. The game. Yes. That Preston win had shown a bit of energy and slightly lifted the mood around the place. Hamilton, as a result of scoring that big winner, made his first senior start. That was announced on the morning of the game. And just touching back on crowds again, Ken Gorman, a journalist in the Journal, claimed that this decision would guarantee a crowd of at least 40,000. You know, just the appearance of a young, exciting new player in the team was thought to give the gate a bit of a boost. Len Hetherington in the Chronicle was slightly less optimistic. He guessed that the crowd would only be about 36,000, which I mean is still a lot bigger than actually paid to come through the door. So there you go. This issue around crowds and how many people were going to turn up to this game was a big talking point before kickoff. I'd actually looked at the attendance before starting doing research and thought, 28,000's maybe a little bit low, but as I say, it appears that the attendances were a consideration before the game. Full team, as I say, Hamilton did start, but in goal, as always, you had Jimmy Montgomery. I'm sure he gave Kelvin another wave just to say, nice to see you, Kelvin. Glad you could make it. Then Dick Malone and Keith Coleman. We had Chris's mum's favourite, Martin Harvey, playing.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. Richie Pitt and Ian Porterfield. And then we had, as our forwards, forwards, it was in the time of the kind of like 2-3-5. It was McGivern, Kerr, Dave Watson, Hamilton, as I say, and Dennis Stewart. Billy Hughes came on from the bench in the second half for Hamilton. And when Hamilton went off, I don't know if you remember, particularly Kelvin, but he played really well, full of energy. I think the supporters really appreciated we had a young kid who was, grafting and working himself into the ground. So he was given a standing ovation when he went off. The two clubs had played the night before, and maybe this is what you were thinking of, Martin, because that was at Ayresome Park. They'd played a reserve game that had finished goalless. Thankfully, the first team game had a bit more action. Middlesbrough had spent a lot of money on their defence in recent times, so they maybe fancied their chances of getting a clean sheet against Sunderland. But this dog has ran on the pitch and scuppered those plans, and knocked their concentration. Interestingly enough, one of the players that seemed to struggle the most was one of Boro's biggest profile signings. It was Nobby Stiles. You've got a fella here who's a World Cup winner. He's had massive success with Man United, and according to reports, he was overawed by the occasion, which just staggers me. I don't see how somebody who's played in a World Cup final can then be knocked off his game by a Division 2 midweek match. Seems a bit odd.
Yeah, I think he's got a well-known aversion to dogs, Nobby Styles, though, has he not?
Yeah. I tell you what, this
That'll be
episode
it.
is... Yeah. This episode is getting quite dog-heavy because we've already got the fittest dogs in the country supporting Sunderland, and now we've got a dog running on the pitch to help Sunderland get the points. So, all canines are obviously red and white at heart.
Aye.
Yeah.
We're barking up the wrong tree here, man. Come on.
Aye. We're on the home straight.
And Andrew, in this game, did Sunderland take the lead?
Well,
yeah, very good. Right,
There's five goals.
Yeah.
5 goals to get through, yeah.
Yeah, come on. Right. As I say, Middlesbrough had a really expensively put together defence. Nobby Stiles was poor, and the Hartlepool Mail the next day was really damning. I'll just read a couple of snippets from that paper. Middlesbrough's defence, which has been reorganised at a cost of £130,000, was sunk without trace by a non-stop Sunderland performance at Roker Park last night. Effort was all the willing youngsters from Sunderland had on display, but it was more than enough to see off Boro. So that's quite harsh, that. And this little line here, Stuart Bohm and Willie Wigham displayed the sort of understanding which tends people to put greater faith into a hold bucket. Now, I had to read that a couple of times just to make sure I'd understood it. And yeah, I mean, that's canny harsh. The other report I read was by Ken Gorman again, who I'd mentioned. He worked for the Journal. It's not a name I recognised, Ken Gorman. I don't know if he covered Sunderland for a while, but his opening line just sounds like something straight out of Kelvin's mind. I think you'll like this one. A bouncing bundle of Scottish dynamite called Bobby Kerr made this a derby of sheer misery for Middlesbrough. Do you like that one, Kelvin? That's
a good strap line. Yeah,
that's
bouncing bundle.
Yeah, that was a bit of you, I thought. Kerr, he's just 5 feet 5 inches tall, stood out like a giant as Sunderland roared to a victory that took them above Boro. It was Kerr, revelling in midfield, who broke the stalemate and, as Martin so nicely put, gave Sunderland the lead, to fire his side on to the victory trail after 25 minutes. It was Kerr who set up Dennis Stewart for the Roker side's third goal, and again, it was now there's a word I can't pronounce, irrepressible Kerr who carved the fourth for substitute Billy Hughes. So, that's really impressive on Kerr's part. And just that line from the other article about how Sunderland's youth and energy was what got through them through that game. Again, that ties in for me, because we'd been relegated in 69-70. Alan Brown had been instructed to cut the wage bill, bring in youth players and try and develop the club that way. The problem is, in some games, you've got no experience and you get overawed. But on the games when the more established players like Nobby Stiles are not on form, Sunderland's verve is enough to get them through. So that was quite telling. as Chris alluded to, there was 5 games in total. Sunderland finished 4-1 winners. I've just lost the scorers. Kelvin, there's a memory test for you while I flail around.
Oh, man.
Oh, yes, I've got them here. Can you remember all 4 scorers or not? Don't worry, I have them out.
Hughes,
Yes.
Kerr, did he get one? Davy Watson get one?
Yes, that was the one I was missing.
Cannot remember the other scorer.
It was Stewart. So Hughes.
Oh, yeah.
Hughes scored at the end from a really nice Bobby Kerr cross. 2 minutes before that, Middlesbrough had pulled a goal back through a lad called Vincent, but by that point we were already 3-0 up. We were in a position to bring Hamilton off with about 9 or 10 minutes. As I say, he'd done really well. Just a really impressive, energetic performance from Sunderland. And we are talking here about 1971. The club is in a bit of a malaise. There is this negative feeling around the place. It is the second of 3 wins in a row, though. Again, though, after that, this lack of experience really comes back to haunt us. We only win 1 of 10 in the weeks that follow. We didn't sign a single player that season. So, this is really, really fallow times for the fans to go through. And I believe, Kelvin, you're going to be talking about a certain game later on in this episode. I just think the contrast between 1971 and a couple of years later is so stark. And that was one of the reasons, lads, why I wanted to talk about this game, because it did show there was potential within the club and there was a couple of young players. Those 4 scorers are all involved in Sunderland over the next couple of years and are massive players as we do start to reap the benefits of potential. But yeah, earlier on in the decade, it wasn't necessarily quite as promising, shall we say.
They just couldn't get a collar on Kerr that night. That was for sure. So
rough, Kelvin. That's rough. Wow.
Well, speaking of dogs going on pitches, so Chris will remember this, if you two do as well, and maybe the listeners will. But like me, Chris is a big fan of the Danny Baker videos that came out in the 90s. And on one, I think it must have been the first own goals and gaffes video, it showed an incident where a dog took out the Brentford goalkeeper, Chick Brodie. And if you watch the video, this dog is in the box on the left-hand side of the TV camera angle. The ball comes down the flank. The dog chases the ball down the flank, gets played to the other end of the pitch, back pass to Chick Brodie. The dog chases after the ball and collides with Chick Brodie trying to get the ball, right? And it's hilarious until you realise that incident, the injury caused by the dog, he did his knee ligaments, Chick Brodie, and that was the last game he ever played. He had to retire.
Oh, no.
So I think he was 30 or early 30s. But this was a year, not even a year before this game at Roker Park. So if you can dig out the video, we'll try to find it and put it into the article on the website. But it's hilarious until you kind of realise that was his last ever action as a professional footballer, was to get clattered by a dog.
Yeah,
questions have got to be asked of the stewards here. What is going on in 1970s football grounds where dogs just wander into the stadium?
Well, they ignored the no dog fouling signs. That must have been up.
Well, on that note, we'll take a short break. We'll be back very soon.
For a limited time at McDonald's, get a Big Mac extra value meal for $8. That means 2 all-beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun, and medium fries, and a drink. We may need to change that jingle.
Prices and participation may vary.
Once upon a mundane morning, Barb's day got busy without warning. A realtor in need of an open house sign? No 50 of them, and designed before 9.
My head hurts.
Any mighty tools to help with this plight?
Aha!
Barb made her move. She opened Canva and got in the groove.
Bulk creating Canva sheets. Create 50 signs fit for suburban streets.
Done in a click, all complete.
Sweet!
Now, imagine what your dreams can become when you put imagination to work at canva.com.
Welcome back to Howay the Dogcast. It's Martin here, and we are celebrating all things dog-related in football, it seems, today as we trawl through another week in Sunderland history. We have just covered the 29th of September, including a memorable game at Roker Park in 1971 against Middlesbrough, which included a dog. And now we are moving on to September the 30th, so 1950. Ivor Broadus scored the first of his 2 Sunderland hat-tricks in a game against Charlton Athletic at Roker Park. We won that one 4-2. 1969. Go on, Kelvin.
Sorry to interrupt you, Martin.
Not in the slightest.
Just a word about Ivor Broadus. I don't know if people realise this lad. He was a journalist. You would see his name in. He covered the North East as a journalist, but this lad, when he joined Carlisle, he was made that player manager when he was 23 years old, and he sold himself to Sunderland, the Bank of England club. It's a really bizarre story. He's a good player. My father always liked that Ivor Broadus, but a bizarre kind of episode that. Could you imagine? I think I'll just sell my.
Well, you wonder what the conversation was like, don't you? Ivor, can I have a word? We've had a bidding for you. Do you want to go? I'm not too sure. I think you should go, mate.
It's just tickled. It's always tickled me that and he's just a young lad. He's really just a young man, isn't he?
Well, he is,
when he's doing all that. Sorry to interrupt, anyway.
No, that is all fine and dandy. 1969, on the 30th of September, Alex Ray was born, and 3 years later, Sunderland played a home game against Nottingham Forest. We won that one 4-1. That was Alan Brown's 200th and final win as Sunderland manager during his 2 spells with the club. 1995. Now, this was a home game against Reading, and then we drew 2-2. And David Kelly, who we'd signed a week or 2 before, scored on his home debut. Andy Melville got the other goal. But I remember this game because Reading had, was it the Bulgarian goalkeeper, Bobby Mikhailov, in goal. And he famously wore a very unconvincing wig, which managed to stay on. But
I just remember I'm remembering the photographs. Like, I remember I genuinely remember there's one where I think David Kelly goes up, challenges him in the air, and I remember the photograph. It's just giving me the giggles of how unconvincing it was.
You can almost see the label "Made in Bulgaria" popping out from under some strands of hair.
On that game in '95, a couple of weird things. Phil Parkinson in the red midfield, which we'll come back to actually, but and don't want to labour on the point, but. Very weird. John Mullen was playing left midfield in this game, and he had Martin Smith on the bench. But
really?
But anyway, that's just an aside. Move on. I just thought that was weird.
I'm going to have to derail us again, lads. As soon as Chris mentioned that photo of Mikhailov, that has reminded me of the Sunderland Annual 1996. And if any listeners have got that, just turn to page 7. There's a photo of him flying through the air, challenging David Kelly. Grimacing.
Yeah, that's the one.
Alongside it, this is in a official annual, I believe. There's the follically challenged 11 with a list of Sunderland players. And funnily enough, this is, again, we always say things always turn around in circles. Making an appearance in the starting 11 is Ivor Broadus. So there you go. Yeah. The stress of negotiations to agree the move to Sunderland obviously led to him losing his hair. Bless him. Do you want to know the rest of the 11, or do we need to get going, gents?
No, I've gotten plenty here.
Well, should we quiz the other two?
Go on.
Single.
Goalkeeper. Sunderland
Goalkeeper.
goalkeeper.
Oh, it's got to be Ned Doig.
No, but it should have been.
It
Good
should have been.
call,
Aye.
Kelvin,
Yeah,
aye.
yeah.
Famously, if his cap fell off in the game, he would run after his cap and ignore where the ball was because he didn't want people to spot his thinning varnet. I think this is a bit harsh, this in goal, because on the photos I see, I don't remember this, Barry
Is it
Siddle.
Barry Siddle?
Yeah.
Aye. Did he have a bit of a comb over, did he?
Receding. He
Yeah.
had a bit of a receding hairline, Barry Siddle, didn't he?
I just remember him having a magnificent tash.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Yeah, that's why he had it, to distract you.
yeah. It had dropped down from higher up his face.
We're going to get into a lot of trouble with this
No,
one.
I know. It's you know what? In all seriousness, it's not a joking matter. It's more just the fact that the Sunderland Annual thought it appropriate to feature Mikhailov and list this 11. So do you want to rattle off the rest there, Martin?
Well, I think it would be good to get down to the bold facts of things anyway.
Now, the follically challenged 11, according to the 1996 Sunderland Annual, was Barry Siddle, Cess Irwin, Warnie Creswell, Charlie Thompson, Fred Hall, Steve Agnew, who, of course, we mentioned last week and was on the podcast artwork for last week. Gordon Harris, Ivor Broadus, as we've talked about. Charlie Fleming, who we've talked about in the previous episode. Pop Robson and Clive Walker. It's really tickled me the fact that they've made an article about this whole thing, and it was all about Mikhailov playing in goal. And they've got a picture from him playing in the World Cup, and the caption is, Bulgaria's World Cup keeper showing signs of a receding hairline. By the time Mikhailov was bought to replace Shaka Hislop, he was completely bald on top. The appearance of Reading's Boris Mikhailov at Roker Park on the 30th of September 1995 poses a question. Was he the first player to wear a wig in a league game at Roker Park?
So, something I've often wondered.
Don't worry about the cups.
Yeah. It's mad. It's mad because, like I say, it's actually, now I'm thinking about, we've had a good laugh. Now I'm thinking about it. It is pretty shocking, to be taking the mick out of something like that. I mean, poor lads can have a complex about it.
Oh, people had tougher skin back then, man's fine.
Well, maybe.
It's all the sun.
I think there's a bit of pot and kettle going on here as well, by the way.
I'm saying nothing. I'm keeping out of this one.
Yeah, me too. Right, we will move swiftly on because 2003, we beat Ipswich 3-2 in the game at the Stadium of Light. Gary Breen, John Oster and Kevin Kyle getting the goals, which was probably aided by the fact that Kelvin Davis was in goal for Ipswich. Darren Bent was also in the starting lineup. 2006, Grant Ledbetter gave Roy Keane his first home win as he scored against Sheffield Wednesday. And we will move on. Actually, Grant Ledbetter with Roy Keane. Roy Keane was the manager who got the best out of Ledbetter, wasn't he? And he took him to Ipswich as well, and I think he really had that springboard for Ledbetter's career in football generally. I think he saw a lot of himself in him.
Mm.
Yeah, he had him at a good age.
Goal as well.
Yeah, he had him at a good age, I reckon.
Great goal.
No, well, he had him probably at the right age because he was an impressionable, but he hadn't quite cracked it. He was really highly rated, wasn't he, when he was sort of coming through in his late teens and hadn't quite kind of really cemented a place at Sunderland, and Roy Keane really gave him an opportunity. Right, we will move on to October the 1st, 1923. Trevor Ford, who, again, we've spoken about now and again in this podcast, he was born. 1927, Dave Halliday scored a hat-trick in a game against Bury. Now, we lost this game 5-3 at Gig Lane, and Dave Halliday's first goal was his 200th in first-class football in England and Scotland. We had a player sent off. Billy Clunas was sent off on 75 minutes, and Adam Allen of Sunderland was also spoken to by the referee 3 times during the game, but wasn't formally cautioned during the match. But he was later reported to the FA for his conduct during that game. We'd gone 1-0 down through a penalty from Jack Ball. Dave Halliday had scored in the 10th minute and 14th to take us to 2-1. Bury equalised. We went back in front, and then Bury scored 3 more goals. The first one was still before half-time. So at half-time, it was it 3-3? 4-3? 3-3. 3-3 at half-time, and then Bury got another 2 with Jack Ball scoring another penalty 2 minutes from time to make it 5-3. Sounds like an entertaining game. Albert McIntyre, who we've already mentioned earlier in this podcast, was in goal for Sunderland. 1932, Patsy Gallagher scored a hat-trick against Blackburn for Sunderland. And in 1983, on the 1st of October, Gary Rowell scored a penalty at Anfield to give Sunderland a victory there. 1990, Jan Kirchhoff was born. And 1994, this is an interesting one, Tony Norman got injured early on in the game at home to Southend. And Alec Chamberlain came on to replace him, becoming the first goalkeeper to come on as sub for Sunderland in a league match.
Oh.
And it doesn't happen that often, does it? You get the odd time.
Well, I think actually the rarest thing was the other thing that happened from the bench. Ian Rogerson came on. I think that was probably more rare than a substitute goalkeeper at the time. But I always found the signing of Alec Chamberlain a bit odd. He came on a free from Luton, and there was a steal, and say Tony Norman was getting on and all this. But it was 1993. Tony Norman was still a fantastic goalkeeper, and it just seemed like a little bit of a waste of time having Tony Norman and Alec Chamberlain on the books at the time. But yeah, it
was a funny one in that Terry Butcher signed him, didn't he, in that summer? And whether it was something to do with, I think it was probably more personality driven thing than anything else. We know that Terry Butcher kind of wanted to clear the decks and get rid of a few players who'd been there for a while and sort of create his own team. And Alec Chamberlain had come through at Ipswich when Terry Butcher and Bobby Ferguson were at the club. So there was a relationship there potentially to kind of explain the transfer. The strangest thing about Alec Chamberlain for me was that a couple of years later, so I think this was when Peter Reid came into the club, Chamberlain was on loan at Liverpool, because when we'd signed Dominic Matteo from Liverpool on loan, Alec Chamberlain gone the other way. And Alec Chamberlain won a League Cup winners' medal that season. I think they played Bolton. And Chamberlain won a League Cup winners' medal from the bench after swapping a substitute bench in the second tier for Liverpool's reserve keeper position.
Couple of different memories there that have just popped off as you're speaking. That League Cup final, I think, was played the day after Peter Reid's first game in charge.
Yeah, very possibly.
Yeah, because I remember we beat Sheffield United. I think it was on April Fool's Day, and they were, as you queued up outside the ground, they were giving away free copies of the newspaper. And the big April Fool's joke was they had a photo of one of the Liverpool players on crutches or in a cast or something like that. And then you looked in the paper and lo and behold, Robbie Fowler, whoever it was, wasn't actually injured. Which just, again, you can't see a modern day footballer going along with that type of joke. But the issue of substituting goalkeepers and what have you, that was back in the time when I think you were only allowed to name 3 substitutes.
That's right.
Yeah, a couple of years ago.
No, go on, Andrew, because I'm just gonna. Wasn't it in the first year where it was increased, where it had to be the third substitute had to be a goalkeeper, and then after a year or something they changed it where they said actually if you want it can be 3 outfield players, but it's up to you.
That sounds familiar. But yeah, there was a period where I think it was actually stipulated that one had to be a goalkeeper, and a couple of years ago a couple of Sunderland shirts were online for sale on eBay. They were outfield shirts, but they had Norman and his squad number on the back. Now these shirts were verified. They weren't just somebody taking the mick. So they must have hatched a plan where maybe if the circumstances were right and presumably if the rules allowed, they must have hatched a plan that if we needed to, Tony Norman was going to come on but play outfield. That would have been fascinating to see.
Well, it must have been able to do that, mustn't they? I'm surprised it didn't actually happen very often because all three subs could be used, and to have the ability to bring on that goalkeeper outfield. There's all these little things that you kind of just wish had happened.
Yeah. Well, I mean, remember the famous one with Stuart Pearce and David James? He did that. But actually, we've talked about it before, Martin, that everything, when you speak to players at that time, they say how good Tony Norman was and how quick he was playing out.
I was just going to say that. Yeah, he had apparently in training he loved to get out the goal and play in training. I definitely remember that. He was quick as well, wasn't he?
Well, as we talked about before, he was the first dribbling goalkeeper. He was the first goalkeeper to bring the ball outside of his box and try to set up attacks with his feet.
And rather apt for this episode, he, of course, signed for the Terriers afterwards.
Indeed. There you go. Another interesting thing with this Chamberlain move to Liverpool, it came about. So David James was Liverpool's first choice goalkeeper. They had I think he was a Danish lad called Michael Stensgaard, who was the reserve goalkeeper for Liverpool. He was injured ironing some clothes.
Never.
So he missed out on being on the bench for the League Cup final at Wembley because he was ironing his shirt, which takes some doing.
Yes.
And
was Chamberlain pressed into action then?
I'm creased up here, Kelvin. Well, it's the time of really sort of bizarre goalkeeper injuries, because around the same time, that was when Dave Besant broke his foot on a salad cream bottle that fell out of his fridge, and he tried to catch it on his foot. And
David James.
Oh, the irony.
Yeah. David James himself. Do you not remember it was either like a wrist or a hand injury? Because wasn't he addicted to video games? And he was staying up until like God knows what time in the morning playing.
That was his version of events, Andrew.
Well, yes. But I remember that vividly because, I mean, David James at the time got dogs abuse for that. Sorry.
A good setup there, wasn't it?
It was true, on. David James did have that issue, in all seriousness.
Well, there was another. Oh, was that when he was Aston Villa? Was that when he was at Villa? Because I'm sure there was a Villa player. I'm sure there was a Villa player as well who had a similar thing where he'd been staying up too late playing video games and stuff like that, and his manager blamed his poor form on not getting enough sleep.
Chris is obviously not convinced, and this does have a Sunderland link. This might need to get cut for legal reasons. Do you remember Bernd Haas when he went to West Brom? He got himself involved in some suspicious late night activities with a computer. There's some worried faces. It's not as bad as it sounds, but I'm pretty sure he got caught in some sort of honey trap where he was chatting up some lass online. And then this lass's fella walks into the room and he's only a West Brom season ticket holder or something. By that point, he's moved on to West Brom and he's like, hang on, why is Bernd Haas talking to my missus with no clothes on? It was something along those lines. So it was a little bit more suspicious than David James claiming he was up late all night playing computer games.
Oh, good. We've gone from the bold facts to the bare facts here.
It's going to the dogs, isn't it, this episode?
Right.
October the 1st, we'll stick to October the 1st, 2002. Now, this was Peter Reid's last victory in charge of Sunderland as we beat Cambridge United 7-0 at the Abbey Stadium. It was our biggest winning margin in the League Cup and also our best away win since we beat Newcastle 9-1. And that was... it still puzzles me that the timing of all of that. Like, we beat Aston Villa at home, as we talked about last week with the David Bellion goal. It's convincingly stuffed Cambridge 7-0 down at their place. Get beat off Arsenal the next week. then you make a change. It still seems illogical.
It makes no sense at all. It makes no sense at all.
It would have made sense like midway through the season before. I remember around the sort of January, February time, we were in poor form and things didn't seem to be going well, but they kind of persevered with him. And you think, well, they're sticking with him for the long haul there. And
well, this is the thing. We were linked with some decent managers when he left. You know, I think there was George Graham on the list. I'm pretty sure we're going from memory. Mick McCarthy was on there at the time.
David O'Leary was a big favorite.
David O'Leary, yeah. And yeah, I mean, I just think they were scrambling because actually they thought because of the previous season they should have made the change in the summer and they didn't. And then it was panic stations after shelling out all that money on Stewart and Flo, wasn't it? But yeah, I agree. We certainly wouldn't have went down like we did if Reid had stayed.
No. And then ill-fated phone call to ask Howard Wilkinson who we should appoint, and then that was that. Anyway, we will move on to October the 2nd, 1958. Bob Boulder, who was a goalkeeper in the 80s, he was born 1968. 10 years later was Phil Gray's date of birth. Our Northern Irish international striker Tippy, as he was known because of his initials. 1976, Bob Lee made his debut against Everton in a 1-0 defeat. Now, in 1982, Sunderland beat Norwich 4-1 at Roker Park, with all of the goals coming in the second half, including the goal from Ali McCoist. And in
bonkers that.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I'll go ahead.
Interrupt again, Martin. It was a bonkers game that. It was one of the times where Durban's team showed its potential.
Yeah.
You could actually see what he was trying to do, and they just clicked in the second half. Ali McCoist had a great game that day, not just for his goal. He was really, really tidy and clever with the ball when he was on his game. McCoist for us. It was a real frustration, I think, watching the team at the time that they had that in them. And I know I've said this about other eras, but we only seemed a couple of players away from having a really good team. It was absolutely a bonkers game in the second half.
Kelvin, I seem to think, was that on the back of us getting gubbed 8-0 at Watford? Have I got that right? I think I have. And if I have, that just shows exactly what you say. We're almost there to being a really good team, but we had it in our makeup to be able to just fall apart as well. The Durban era was a massively intriguing one. A kind of what if. There's a sense of what if.
Yeah. He used to do this thing, Durban. He sometimes used to play Sean Elliott in midfield. And he played him with, when we were on about, it was funny, I was thinking about this earlier. I'd forgotten this was coming up. When you were talking about Darren Holloway, he used to play Sean Elliott in midfield. And he played that day alongside Mick Buckley, if you can ever remember him, another 5'5" good lad, good player.
Favourite of yours, Kelvin, eh?
I did actually like him, Buckley. I thought he was a good foil, but him and Elliott together that day, by gum, they took some getting through and getting past, and Elliott was all action. He was box to box. When you played him in midfield, he went from being a rock steady centre half to being a box to box midfielder. He was. I always found him really effective when he played there. We were just a bore hair, as they say in Scotland, from being a really good team and a good mix of experience. And you could see what Durban was trying to do, just couldn't quite get it over the line, I don't think.
No, must have been a good second half. Gary Rowell scored after 50. Ali McCoist scored with about 20 minutes left. Gary Rowell got another one. John Cook scored with 10 minutes left to make it 4-0. And Dave Bennett, obviously brother of Gary, got one with 3 minutes left to get a consolation for Norwich. And in the Norwich lineup that day was Keith Burchin. Martin O'Neill played in midfield for Norwich, and obviously Keith Burchin, as well as having a playing spell with Sunderland, was on O'Neill's coaching staff. Steve Walford, who was also on O'Neill's coaching staff, was in the Norwich lineup that day. And in goal was Chris Woods, who obviously had a spell with Sunderland in our final season at Roker Park. Didn't play a competitive game, but played in the last game at the stadium against Liverpool, didn't he? Former England goalkeeper. Now then, let's have a look at where we were. October the 2nd, sticking on that same date, because in 1999 we were second in the Premier League. We'd just beaten Bradford 4-0 away from home. Kevin Phillips getting 2 of those goals and hitting the heights. I think that's our highest. I don't think we've ever got to be first in the Premier League. I think I'm correct in saying that. I think second's the highest that we've ever got. Until this season, of course. If you listen to this in May, you might think we're talking rubbish. But there you go. We will pause for a moment there to take a short break, and we'll be back with you very soon.
They got Willa. They got my daughter. I need to find her.
From acclaimed director Paul Thomas Anderson.
You can save that girl.
Today, experience what is being called the best movie of the year.
This is the end of the line. Not for you.
Leonardo DiCaprio, Sean Penn, Benicio del Toro, Tiana Taylor, Chase Infinity.
Let's go! Here I am.
One battle after another. Now playing only in theaters. Experience it in IMAX. Rated R. Under 17, not admitted without parent.
You can't hide.
Finish training for the day? Time to fight post-workout fatigue with Core Power Protein Shakes. They're packed with 26 grams of high-quality protein to build muscle and electrolytes to help hydrate. The nutrition you need to help your body replenish, rebuild, and repair post-workout so you can power on to the next one. Champion your recovery with Core Power. Visit corepower.com to learn more.
Does it ever feel like you're a marketing professional just speaking into the void? But with LinkedIn ads, you can know you're reaching the right decision makers, a network of 130 million of them, in fact. You can even target buyers by job title, industry, company, seniority, skills, and did I say job title? See how you can avoid the void and reach the right buyers with LinkedIn ads. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome back to How We're the Podcast for another episode Run This Week, and you rejoin us as we hit October the 3rd. And we're going to go back to 1948 to start October the 3rd off, because that is when Vic Hallam, our 1973 FA Cup centre-forward, was born near Burton upon Trent. 20 years later, 1968, Gary Hours was born. 1979, now we talked about John Hawley a few weeks ago. On October the 3rd, 1979, John Hawley made his debut for Sunderland in a third-round League Cup replay win over Man City at Roker Park. He set up Pop Robson's winner. Pop Robson, of course, famously in the follically challenged 11. 1984, on October the 3rd, we had 3 players sent off. We were playing a friendly in Sweden. And it doesn't sound very friendly because Barry Venson, Paul Lemon and Clive Walker were all sent off in that game. But famously on October the 3rd, 1973, Roker Park was the venue, Kelvin, for Sunderland's first European Cup Winners' Cup tie.
Oh, yeah, it was. It was. And we had Denny Chewett on the wing. What a game. What a game he played. He'd done the business in the first tie. We were 2-0 up. We're coming into this. Were we favourites? Probably. We were just about to play the highest level of football ever to be played at Roker Park, arguably. And what did the directors do? They doubled the price of tickets for this game. That's what they did. They doubled the price of tickets. So it was £1 to go and stand on the terrace, and it was £2 to go and sit in the stand. And their idea, they had a problem with the floodlights. If you've ever tried to find video footage of this game, you'll not find anything, that's clear and and vivid on the game. If you go looking for it, there's a real problem with the floodlights and evening matches. I think you've maybe seen the grainy footage of Vic Hallam's goal the season before in the FA Cup. Midweek matches at the time didn't come across on TV very well, so they had to upgrade the floodlights. And because they were playing in Europe, it was like a stipulation that you had to do that. So they decided that they would double the prices and pay for the upgrade on the floodlights, which it's bonkers when you think about it, given what was going on in the area at the time. Andrew was touching upon that. There was real hardship at the time, and Sunderland in particular. I mean, we're just about to break into the Yom Kippur War, and OPEC was going to really put its foot down in terms of the availability of oil to countries that supported Israel. It was really tough for the steel, the coal, the shipbuilding industry at the time. There's all sorts of stuff going on, and the directors thought this would be a good idea to double the prices. It was a real kick in the guts to the fans. I really felt it was a terrible sort of decision from the directors to do that. On top of that, and Andrew was talking about crowds earlier. The crowd for this game was terribly disappointing. When you look at it, we're just about to see the highest level of football to be played at Roker Park. Arguably, there was 22,700 rolled in for the game. And I think it was like the perfect storm. There were a couple of other things going on. The team hadn't played particularly well that season, and were home games. We hadn't won a game at home. We'd drawn 2 and lost 1. The season hadn't started particularly well. That was going on. There was some difficulties behind the scenes in the dressing room with contracts and players and uplift. The players, I think that I'm speaking generally here, there'd been some disenchantment from the players about the financial reward from the FA Cup run and uplift on contracts and stuff like that. So that was kind of bubbling away in the background. It was interesting. Part of the reason for not doing that, given by the directors, was the social and economic climate at the time. So they were obviously aware that there was hardship, and that it maybe wasn't the best time to be boosting footballers' salaries when everybody else that's watching is really struggling. But it didn't stop them from doubling the prices for this game. It was a very, very stupid decision, that. In the middle of all that, Bob Stoker, I think he tread quite a difficult line coming into that game. He was one of the things he said, because there was the tickets weren't selling very well, and there was no indication that there was going to be a particularly big crowd. Although the 3 home games prior to this, I think there had been. I think the average gate was about 28,500 for the home league games, round about that. But Stoker, he was quoted in the papers as saying, I'll read you his quote, just with regards to the concern about the crowd. "I refuse to believe these wonderful fans are going to turn their backs on us on our big night. They will be there," was Stoker's line on this. So it was a big talking point coming into the game, what might happen. Stoker was talking the game up. He was saying that he wanted to give the fans something back for the support. The Vasas manager hadn't given up on the game. One of the things he said, and hinting out what went wrong in Budapest, was I think they had underestimated Sunderland, because he said Vasas won't underestimate Sunderland. and we will be up for the game, and we're targeting an early goal. Was one of the things that he'd said. So the both were adding a bit of spice to the tie. It didn't feel like the tie was over. Prior to the game, Vassos were described as being at full strength, and you'll remember if you listen to the previous episode where we talked about the game in Budapest, they were a team full of Hungarian internationals or under 23 Hungarian internationals. There were a rich mix of youth and experience, this Vassos team, with some really good players that played for them. Sunderland weren't at full strength. We came into this game, and at this point, the message was that Richie Pitt was still carrying a knock. He'd picked up a knock in the Luton game, and he was actually stretchered off in that game. I was at that game. He was stretchered off, and I think we made the comment when we were talking about the away leg in Budapest that it would be the last time the 73 team would play together. And at the time, we didn't know that Richie Pitt he would never play again at the top level of football. That injury that he got against Luton finished his career. But Stokoe did bring a lad in, and he was a handy player. This lad, David Young. He'd bought him the season before, January the season before, from Newcastle, along with Ron Guthrie. And David Young was a little bit unlucky. He got injured in the season before in the Reading, coming into the Reading match, the Reading Cup tie, away at Reading, and Richie Pitt took his place in the team. Richie Pitt was on his way out of the club. He was going to Arsenal on loan, and but Young got injured, so Stokoe played Pitt, and he played so well that he kept his place. So there's an irony there that Young went out of the team because he got an injury and Pitt took his place the season before, and then at this point Young comes back into the team because Pitt's got this injury. He was a good enough player. He played sort of centre half. When he played with Watson, you would describe him. You probably look at how them two played together and say that Young was the sweeper and Watson was the strike centre half in that game. That's how he kind of played. But he could fill in at fullback, David Young, as well. He could play either side as fullback. So there was nothing wrong with David Young. He was an experienced enough and handy enough player. The bench saw somebody come in who I always really liked. I watched this lad play as a youth player, Bobby Mitchell from South Shields. He was a standout youth player. He was a cracking player, this lad. But he only ever played one game for Sunderland, and he came onto the bench. And when I saw the bench, I was really hoping he'd get on. I love to see the young players get a go, but he came onto the bench with Swinburne, the goalkeeper, Joe Bolton, Jackie Ashurst, and John Lathan. So that bench, it was packed with young players on the bench, and I'm sort of stressing that because I think I had a small go at Bob Stokoe about the opportunities that he would give to young players. So I'm tipping me hat at Bob there for the bench full of young players. Okay. Our form coming into the game, as I said, wasn't great, but we were coming off the back of a 1-1, quite a tough 1-1 draw at West Bromwich Albion. So there's a little bit of, that's a good result, and it was a good result at West Brom, and thinking, right, here we go. We're gonna get into this now. I must mention Pelé here. At this point, it was a funny thing. It was just something that caught my eye that happened on the day of this game. Was The economic climate might have been difficult in Sunderland, but there was an article about Pelé coming into this game that he'd announced that he would give all his monthly wages, to charitable projects in his hometown of Santos in Brazil. It's near Sao Paulo. And that would amount to about £2,000 per month. And it always struck me as being what a really, really generous sort of entrepreneurial thing to do. Fantastic. It'd be fantastic to be able to do that for your hometown. And I remember telling people about that, and then my old dad, he put us right. He'd obviously been listening to something on the radio about this, and he says, he is doing that. He says, but he'll still be having the lights on and coal for his fire, because he earns about £6,700 a month in advertising contracts and stuff like that. So I was like thinking, I'd spent half the game telling people about Pelé, and what a fantastic bloke he was. But we shouldn't. A lot of people wouldn't have done that. Good for Pelé, I thought. So we've got 22,700 people in the ground, which is disappointing. The weather wasn't great. There was a bit of fog around. The rain had bucketed down. It was just about at a drizzle by the time the game kicked off, but it wasn't, and it was cold. It was a cold night. But I don't know how much the weather impacted on the crowd. I think it was more to do with the hike in prices. And something else which we might come back to is fans' attitude to European football. We were still at despite Celtic and Man United and Rangers had done some stuff in the Cup Winners' Cup, despite these teams, Spurs, I think, had done well in the Cup Winners' Cup as well. There was still sort of, there were still some people, some fans that weren't that bothered about Europe.
I think that's an interesting point, Kelvin, because, for everyone looking at modern football, like the Champions League's the pinnacle, isn't it? And international football isn't as prioritised. The FA Cup's lost a lot of its magic. So, where did the competitions rank at this point, from your perspective? Where did the FA Cup compare to winning the First Division compared to playing in Europe? How were things seen?
So, for me, as an individual fan, I'm not speaking for any other fans at that time, because I think there was a huge continuum of opinions about this, including Bob Stoker. He let the cat out of the bag a little bit on it after the game and where he ranked it. So I was totally excited about playing in Europe. I loved the idea of it. I loved the idea of having nicked off to Reading without me folks finding out the season before. In my mind's eye, I thought, I wonder if I can get to Milan without them knowing, the challenge of it definitely appealed to me as a 15-year-old, and I loved the idea of it, but I think it depends what your exposure to it had been, Martin. My dad, we used to listen to the big European games on the radio. So Celtic's journey to Europe, I've really, really fond memories of sitting with him, listening to these. We'd gather around the kitchen table with the radio on, and you'd be sitting there till yon time at night, it seemed, listening to these games. So Europe always sort of fascinated me. I couldn't even say to you that it was a generational thing, because amongst my mates who I went to the games with, we were probably split 50-50 about it. I had mates that went to every Sunderland game and that I went to every Sunderland game with, who didn't bother their chuffs about going going to see this game or the Sporting Lisbon.
Oh, it's interesting, isn't it? Because obviously, even if you take the Northeast as a bit of an example, this is only 4 years after Newcastle had won we say a European Cup. They qualified because they had an exhibition hall, but they still won a European trophy. So that sort of competition between Newcastle, Sunderland rivalry, all that sort of thing, you would have thought that would have played a bit of a part into it.
Yeah. The other thing, if you look at this season, and I mentioned this the last time we're talking about the Vassas game and cup ties. There were definitely an energy and an appetite for cup football. There was still that there because we played Derby in a 3-game League Cup marathon, and there were. I'm sure there's round about an average of 38,000 for the 2 home games that we ended up playing against Derby just a little bit later on in the season. And then we'll play Liverpool. We'll go out to Liverpool, but there's another 36,000, 37,000 crowd come in. So there's an appetite for cup football, but it would seem that some people, can't put it all down to that. There was definitely a kickback about the ticket prices. There were definitely people that didn't go because of the ticket prices.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, the difference 16,000 between the European Cup tie against Vassas and Derby, but you've got to remember as well, Derby were a big draw around then. It was just after Cloughy, not long after Cloughy had left, and Dave Mackay was manager, and they had Colin Todd and John O'Hare in their team, which probably pulled a few more in as well. But you're
Definitely.
right. But 16,000 more for those League Cup games as well against Derby is a massive difference. Because you'd imagine now, even if we played the minnows of, I don't know, Estonia or whatever next season, or the season after, you never know. But if we got them in the first round of the Conference League or whatever, it would. I mean, you're guaranteed to get a full house, aren't you?
Yeah. It was different days, different times. I think when I can still remember round about that time that if we had a home game on a Saturday and a home game midweek, that there would be people who were weighing up which game to go to because they couldn't afford to go to both games. So the economic climate at the time was definitely an issue.
Without doubt. It is an interesting point, though, from Martin, or an interesting question about where did European football lie in people's priorities? Because, the home game, the crowd's lower than what you would expect. And yet you had, was it maybe 500, 600 fans desperate to not only go and see Sunderland play abroad, but they were going behind the Iron Curtain to watch Sunderland play. So, it is peculiar that maybe was it the fact that it was away from home that appealed to people and there was something a bit more exotic? I don't know. I'm really fascinated by the stories of Sunderland fans who went to those 2 away legs, travelled to the continent to see us. And then, like you say, you've then got maybe lads who you knew, Kelvin, who lived in the Northeast, weren't even bothered about going to the home legs. It's a funny little.
It was very odd, very, 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 very odd time that to figure out where people were coming from. I got quite incensed at my mates that just didn't roll in, because they didn't come because they didn't have the money. They didn't come because they weren't as bothered about European football. What I will say to you is it was a big night for European football in Britain. That night we had Leeds, Liverpool, Rangers, Celtic, Wolves, Spurs, all playing at home, and it was only Liverpool that got a bigger gate than us on the night. Liverpool had 28,000, I think, rolled into Liverpool.
I was going to ask. I mean, was there a lot because they just thought we were through after winning the first leg 2-0?
I'm guessing that there might be people that thought that, Chris. I felt that there might have been. I think it was just almost for this game at Sunderland. It seemed like a perfect storm of issues. The ticket prices, the way the team had been playing, were we through the tie? Would we just save a bob or two and not go and wait until see who we drew out of the next for the next, round? Was it something to do with that? We had a home game coming up on the Saturday after the game in the middle of the week. So there's probably a perfect storm of issues, really. I was totally into it as a 14, 15-year-old, but I'm afraid I can, when I look back on that, I was, my exposure to European football had been going on for quite a long time. My dad would, as I say, would stick the radio on, and he never made you come and listen to it, but the noise he used to make, and you get an occasional swear word out of him. The stuff as a kid, I'll go and sit with my father and listen to him swearing, and my mother giving him a row for swearing in front of the kids, And
it's funny, isn't it? Because there was almost like a little, almost a generation where they were brought up on Wolves, who started playing in Europe, and actually they got a lot of fans, didn't they? From kind of almost like a lot of the Irish people for that generation supported Wolves, and Wolves were people's second club because they listened to them on the radio, taking people on in Europe. Just quickly on that game of the weekend, they played Sheffield Wednesday, and Derek Dooley was their manager, and I drive on Derek Dooley Way in Sheffield most days, actually. Just
man. Yeah,
incidentally.
What a legend he was there, wasn't he? Derek Dooley. I used to live in Doncaster, and lived next door to a Chef Wed fan in Doncaster, and across the road from Johnny Waters' brother in Doncaster. What a little football enclave that was down there. God Almighty. Anyway, stop distracting us, man. I've got a story to tell about this game. Yeah. There's a story before we've even got to the game about what's going on. It's not clear why. I think it's a perfect storm anyway. Game kicks off, and right from the start, Stoker had played it cagey coming into the game about what his tactics might be. He wasn't averse, I think I said this. He wasn't averse to saying one thing to one reporter and then saying something else to another in his dour sort of Northumbrian brogue, and like they totally believed that that's what he was going to do. And then, the boy at the Echo and the boy at the Journal are saying two different things because that's what he said to them, and trying to suss out what his plan was nobody's business. He was very clever at that, I thought. But anyway, right from the off, we're at it. We're not sitting back defending a 2-0 lead. We go for it. And the start, and again, I don't know whether it was Stoker's plan to do this, but the way that we started got the crowd right into it. It's a funny thing sometimes. I've often thought this about Roker Park, that sometimes when you had a 20,000 crowd in, they would make more noise than a 30,000 crowd. It was a funny thing that used to happen. I don't know whether it was the acoustics, the echo, I don't know what it was. And night matches as well, the noise. But the way that the crowd got into the game was, I think, triggered by the way that the team started. I mean, we might have scored 3 goals in the first sort of 10 minutes if it hadn't been for that Hungarian international goalkeeper, Mazaros. He was what a star he was on the night. There was it was like a personal duel going on between him and Dennis Stewart. It was like he decided, there's no way I'm letting that boy Stewart score. And Dennis Stewart's thinking, I'm fancying myself a couple of more goals here against this crew. Stewart was on fire that night. I don't know whether Malcolm Allison was in the crowd or what, or whether he knew that, the scouts were there watching him. But boy, what a game he played! I've said before, for people that never saw him play, if you did see Ryan Giggs play, he's probably the closest. That's when I used to watch Giggsy flying at his best. I used to think, boy, he always reminds me of Dennis Stewart. He had that electric pace and ball control, and he was on his game. He was a very, very exciting player to watch, Stewart. And he's into it within the first 10 minutes. Ian Porterfield, who had a really good game this night as well, finds Stewart fizzes a low shot off the grass. That was the other thing that he was clever at. Stewart, he would play the conditions a little bit. Fizzes a shot off the grass that Mazaros just gets to, and really gets the crowd going. Ron Guthrie had a great game as well this night. He was involved in loads of stuff. Most of it going forward. Most of it going forward. But he has a throw in that Stewart just nipped. He used to have a long throw, Guthrie, as did Bobby Kerr. Two unlikely lads for long throw-ins, but Guthrie hit the front post from a throw-in, and Mazaros coming out to collect the ball. It looked a steal, no pressure, and Stewart just zipped in and spun on the ball with his head, and the ball just went over the bar. You're like going, "Oh, you bugger!" I honestly thought that one was in. And then Guthrie got fouled. He was dead involved in the game in the first 10 minutes. And Stewart took the free kick. Sometimes Ronnie Guthrie used to take free kick. He had a fierce shot on him, Ron Guthrie, giving off a chance. So Stewart takes a free kick. That gets blocked, but they don't clear it. It's bashing around the box. Vic Hallam fires a shot in. It's deflected to Guthrie, who sends this pile driver. And it looks like it's going in. Yeah. I mean, we were all up. The hands were in the air. That's in the back of the net, that one. And Mazaros comes again with a late save and tips it round for the corner. So a really exciting start to the game, and the crowd right into it. Another, within a flash after the seasons before games. That Man City game under the floodlights. You're in there with the floodlights are on, the drizzle's coming down, and the crowd are totally into the game, and Sunderland are driving at this team. And they were struggling at this point. It did look like, I thought, this lot are going to cave. They're not going to be able to hang on here, but they did. They got an edge back into the game. They were a team full of internationals, as I say, and there was a lad called Berardi playing for them, who he bent a free kick around the wall, and Ronnie Guthrie just got his head to it. You couldn't keep him out the game, Guthrie, at this point. Just got his head to it. That would have gone in if he hadn't have got his head to it. And then literally a couple of minutes later, they're on the attack again, Vassas. And this, I think it was more like a cross shot comes in, and it's sort of Ron Guthrie's running back, and it sort of comes over his shoulder. The cross comes from the left where Guthrie was playing, but he'd had to turn around and was running back. And he looks over his shoulder, sees the ball, and tries to boot it clear, but he doesn't quite get his timing right. Yeah, bugger. He rattles the bloody ball off the underside of the crossbar, and I can still see his face, As soon as he hit it, he knew, oh, shit, I've scored here at the wrong end, and you're like, I mean, it's one of them visuals, isn't it? If a photographer had taken a photograph of the people on the full end, would all been standing like that, and Guthrie's face was class. But it was a real let-off. And I've thought about this since then, about that game. If they had scored, given the way that we started the season, I do think it might have been it would have been a different game. This, I think, there was something that wasn't quite right within the team. We seemed to be, letting teams into games, or giving away leads. It wasn't. There was something that wasn't quite right with the team. Anyway, having had a let off, Guthrie gets himself a goal. He rockets the ball in the back of the net about 5 minutes later. Really good shot from an angle, which he, as I've said, he had that in him, Ronnie Guthrie. But Vic Hallam had strayed offside, and the goal wasn't given. It would have been a cracking goal, that, if Vic hadn't just strayed offside. And I think he was offside. There wasn't much debate about it. I think he just, whether he was interfering with play or not, that's a different argument. But I think he was offside. So the game goes on like that. They have quite a bit of the ball. They're playing some nice football, but not really threatening our goal that much. And then we're springing. We're winning the ball. As I've said, Ian Porterfield that night. In midfield, Horswell, Kerr and Porterfield played really well that night, but a lot of it was about helping the defence out and nipping in and winning the ball back. And Porter that night, I think he didn't miss his man all night. He was long and short, dead simple stuff. Really accurate long passing, and he hits Horswell. Horswell hits Hallam, and there's another absolute pile driver from Hallam that Majaros saves again. That lad had a great game that night. I mean, goalie. It's funny when you talk about goalkeepers. I always think about this. Like when I'll say, I find myself writing a bit, and I'll say, Jimmy Montgomery, what a goalkeeper! What a great game he had! Look at all the saves he made. And then you think, there's a little message there, isn't there? The opposition are obviously dominating the game, and you're having to rely on your goalkeeper away. It was a funny game because they played some nice football, but they didn't really threaten our goal too much, and we were just going. It seemed like every time we went up the pitch, we had a shot or a near miss or a good cross. It was a funny game like that. Anyway, just before half time. Vic Hallam had his offside transgression revisited on him, because he slams the ball into the back of the net from I think he picked it up from a corner kick. It came out. Porterfield got the ball. I can see it in my mind's eye. Porterfield gets the ball, plays it to Hallam. Really nice pass to Hallam, and he absolutely rockets it into the back of the net. But somebody's offside. Now that one, because there's no low footage on this game, I've got no idea who was offside. I didn't know who it was on the night. I spoke to a couple of people that were in the clock stand. They said he must have had a good view of that, who was offside. No idea who was offside, and the goal was cancelled. Anyway, we go into half time. It's 0-0 each, but obviously we're 2-0 up from the first leg. It's been a good game where the teams applauded off the pitch. All seemed good in the camp. And we come out the second half and we start the same way. And it's Stewart again. He twice goes on a mazy run, picks the ball up. And when he ran with the ball, he ran at pace. He was really, really quick. He had this great ability to go left or right past a defender. He was two-footed, Dennis Stewart. He could take the ball on either side. Two great runs, two cracking shots. But Mazzaros, I think every time Stewart got the ball in their half, Mazzaros was looking at him and saying, "As no way, son, you're putting that ball past me." He saves. They come back. They had a good. Monty made a good save from one of their stars, a guy called Muller, who if you ever watched the Hungarian team play, you'd pick him out. He was a good player. They also had a great, another lad I'll mention in this bit. They had a great sort of full length of the pitch bit of play Vasas. They swept the ball. It was if they'd scored, you would have said, boy, you'll not see many better team goals than that. I think there was about 6 different players played the ball through a defence, and there was a player called Vidat was about to let rip, and were Duracell Bunny that night, Bobby Kerr, just got in there. He was great at that, just sneaking in and nicked the ball off his foot. So much so that it was a fresh air kick from Vidas. He didn't even know the ball had gone, Kerr just got to him. He put in a huge shift that night, Bobby Kerr. He was everywhere as the song goes. Where game goes on, Guthrie bends a free kick round the wall. He had that in his armoury. Mazzaros saves it. And then just before the hour, there's a bit of Sunderland pressure, ball pinging about in the box, and the big number 9, who delighted in the name of Gas, controls a bouncing ball with his fist. Now, I saw that. It did happen at our end. I saw that, and I thought, "Whoa, that's a penalty." The ref gave it straight away, a penalty, but their whole team was up. And I mean, this went on for, I haven't got a time of how long the complaints went on, but we weren't used to seeing that then. It wasn't there was only Leeds United used to surround the ref and harangue the ref. They started all that in English football. But the whole of the Vasas team were surrounded the ref. The ref was Portuguese, I think, surrounded him. And, it was a hell of it seemed like minute before the ref had cleared them off. They were incensed by the decision. But it looked pretty straightforward to me. I thought, that lad's he stuck his arm out and controlled it with his fist. It wasn't even like his forearm or his shoulder. I mean, he stopped the ball from bouncing up by sticking his fist on the top of it. The penalty stood. And one of the things I remember about this was Dennis Stewart. He was a cool dude. He's standing about, you couldn't even tell who was going to take the kick, because he's just standing watching all the furore, and standing to the side of what's going on out of the box. And then the ref clears the players away. And I mean, he's threatening players with a booking and stuff, clears the players away. And, Stewart steps forward. And you can see that it's I'm going to say it was a Hungarian standoff. He's looking at the goalkeeper. The goalkeeper's looking at him. He gives him the eyes, and he sends him the wrong way, puts the ball in the back of the net. What a game he had that night, Dennis. I mean, cool as anything. Slots it in the back of the net, turns round, walks away with his hand in the air, 2 ties, two good goals. It was a good penalty in the circumstances. With it, crowd again, totally, 3-0. Who would have believed it? First time in Europe, 3-0 up. They're not coming back from this, we're thinking. They did put a bit of pressure on. I think Monty had another save to make, and Guthrie and Bobby Kerr again cleared. They weren't quite on the line, but Monty was out of position. If they hadn't been there was a chance the ball might have rolled into the back of the net. But Guthrie and Kerr had 2 good clearances. But right at the finish there, if anybody was going to score, it was us. And I tell you, it's something else about this particular player, Dick Malone. His engine was brilliant. He He had huge stamina. And if you watch your FA Cup final, the 73 FA Cup final video, and look who it is that's attacking up the wing in the dying minutes of the game and relieving the pressure, it's Dick Malone charging up the wing, taking the ball up there, and this is what he does in this tie. He has 2 great runs, 2 good shots, and Masaros saves them as well. But we see the game out to progress. There's a bit of chagrin at the end, the post-match, the Vasas management are at the referee. There's a bit of gesticulating and stuff like that going on, but the game's lost. We're finished. It's 3-0. You're out. We move forward. And the team are applauded off the pitch. Dennis Stewart, man of the match, definitely. What a game he had. Ian Porterfield that night, not that far behind him. He looked well comfortable. In that the Hungarians played this sort of snappy passing game. I mean, Porter looked well comfortable with that. He said, I'll have a bit of this. I like this stuff, and he could get everybody playing round about him, Porterfield, when he was in the fettle. And of course, generally, Stewart played down his side. Generally, I mean, Stewart loved to wander. Both him and Billy Hughes could go on the wander, but generally, Stewart would be on the left and Hughesy on the right, So brilliant stuff, marvellous. Stoko, he's got things to say afterwards. He's claiming that it's a plan. We played it the way we wanted to play it. I was happy with the way it went. This was very valuable European experience, was Uncle Bob's verdict on that. It was our first home win of the season, and we did follow it up with the game on the Saturday against Sheff Wed, and I went to that game, and it did look like it had relieved. The shackles were off. We played a cracking game on the Saturday as well. The crowd was disappointing. I definitely was disappointed with that, and I took some hits. I was going to school in Newcastle at the time, and my Newcastle supporting schoolmates were a little bit nippy with us, and I could feel how the hairs stand up on the back of your neck, and you're thinking, oh, what can I? It was a great win. We've gone through, and these buggers are nipping me about the size of the crowd, But as I say, it was Liverpool were the only team that had a better attendance on the night. And I would suggest to you there that maybe there was something generally in English football about where people saw Europe in their list of priorities. Stoko's attitude to it was interesting, because he talks the game up. You heard what he had to say beforehand. A day or two later, he's bemoaning Europe as a distraction and causing fixture pile up for him. I think I always felt that there was, his priority was getting Sunderland promoted was his priority, and now was going to get in the road of that. He wanted, having won the cup, he wanted the big prize for him was promotion. So it was a cracking game of football. I really felt for the people that couldn't afford to go to that game. I really felt for. I thought you missed a cracking memory, a cracking night of football. And, we had this sort of unusual feeling of wondering who we were going to pull out in the draw, I really fancied somebody like Real Madrid or Barcelona. I was up for seeing if I could get the away leg of that without me mother and father knowing. I was up for that. And wasn't disappointed when we drew Sporting Lisbon. They were one of Europe's, well-known teams at the time. And that game would be played in October the 24th. You didn't have too long to wait, and there was lots going on. league games. We had the League Cup coming up. There was a hell of a lot going on at the time. But I felt that David Young played canny that night. He did all right. And I felt like the team was just starting to get back into its groove a little bit. Davy Watson played well. Every time, I know I said this the last time, but Watson was one of them players. If you asked him to step up, he did, and he did it really well. Dave Watson, every time you put him on a stage, he could do that. But there were lots of good performances on the night. I thought the crowd did really well, given the backdrop to that as well. It was quite raucous. So we moved on, and we moved on to Sporting Lisbon, but we didn't know that then. Just as we didn't know that we'd seen the last of Richie Pitt in terms of his playing career with Sunderland. So there we go. With very first European game at Roker Park.
Look, Kelvin, love that. Absolutely fascinating. It really intrigues me, that little mini-European campaign we had. Just something I wanted to quickly touch on there. You said that our attendance at Roker Park, there was a few question marks over it, although compared to other British clubs in action that night, it fared comparatively well. I'm just looking here at some of the other attendances that evening in this competition. And again, the attendance on Wearside is one of the better ones. There's a couple of clubs here who are more established in European terms, and they're not even getting 10,000 in on the night. And the final itself was played in May 74. It was in Rotterdam, so in the Netherlands. There's less than 5,000 fans in attendance for the final. So, European football in that era is still trying to establish itself. Obviously, you've got the issues with travel and what have you. One of the teams in the final are from East Germany, Magdeburg, who actually win it. Obviously, with them being East German, that might have impacted their ability to travel to the game. But, a European Cup final now with less than 5,000 in attendance would just be, unless it's COVID, that would just be unthinkable. So just interesting how attendances were variable at that time.
Yeah.
I think
definitely.
You just look at the League Cup attendances that we spoke about, and also the FA Cup attendances that you got in those days. And I think for a lot of people, the domestic cups, the domestic trophies, were the ones that were a priority. I can even remember talking to my mates in the 80s, and it's kind of like, would you rather win the FA Cup or win the league? Oh, rather win the FA Cup. And just
definitely.
the priority of where those competitions and the prestige of those competitions, it's completely different to how it is today.
Yeah. And you think how big the FA Cup was. You wonder if this European Cup Winners' Cup as well, you're not talking about the European Cup, which actually built up a bit of prestige over those early years. The Cup Winners' Cup hadn't built that up. And, you look at past winners before we took part in it, like Chelsea won it in 71, Man City won it in 70, West Ham won it in 65, Spurs won it in 63. But actually, you never really hear about that all that much in terms of those clubs' kind of European successes. So, I do think with, as you said, how big the FA Cup was, this was probably, I mean, Kelvin, you can probably tell us if I'm wrong, but it was probably down there with the League Cup, I imagine.
Difficult to, I'd sort of go along so far with you on that. Difficult for me to say because of my exposure to European football. I was totally into it, and as a 15-year-old struggled to see what people's problems was with it. Why wouldn't you? Looking back on it, I see it a little bit. I'm a bit more balanced about it.
I know how you feel, Kelvin. I couldn't understand why people didn't like the Anglo-Italian Cup when I was a bear neither.
It's because we played Port Vale or something, didn't it?
Cambridge and Tranmere, I think.
We're talking about that last week. If I could throw that in now, we're talking about that last week, and I couldn't remember who would played. So we had played Cagliari, we had played Lazio, and we played Fiorentina as well, within the space of about 2 years in the 70. Yeah.
So we played bigger teams in that than we did the Cup Winners' Cup, I think.
Aye. Yeah.
The Cagliari, if I can get me tongue around it.
It's easy for you to say.
Well, yeah, it sounds like a dish you'd order in a restaurant. I seem to think that game in the Anglo-Italian Cup was really violent. Like
it was.
There was a lot of niggle in the crowd. Where like I think the crowd were pelting either the referee or some of the travelling Sunderland party with stones and all sorts. So maybe there's a bit of that knocking around as well. This idea of European football, are we going to be exposed to violence? I don't know. I'm just throwing that in there as a possibility.
Don't know what. I never quite got it myself at the time. I still more lean towards it was the perfect storm of issues.
Yeah.
Money, people's attitude towards Europe, and then in this game, definitely the hike in prices for the game. It felt like rich men were making decisions there that every so often you'd think the board of bloody directors hasn't got a bloody clue about the people that support this club, and that was definitely, that fueled some of that feeling that they were out of touch with the fan base, really.
Let's face it, though, as well. We're talking as if here Sunderland were playing in front of, and this isn't a joke, 2 men and a dog. That was genuinely the phrase that came to mind. I can't think of a similar one, but we're talking as if Sunderland, walked out at Roker Park and there's 4 empty stands there. It's still a good attendance, and there will have been, goodness knows how many clubs in the country at that point would have been thrilled to be getting gates of over 20,000. So, we're talking
relativity.
In the context of Sunderland support.
Remembering that the year before, we were packing 50,000 plus crowds in for the FA Cup ties, and 40-odd thousand for league games, and stuff like that. So,
but as
it was a bit of a.
Yeah, it was a talking point, certainly. But as Martin says, the FA Cup was something else. I mean, the FA Cup final was broadcast around the world in those years, so it probably was the biggest domestic game in the world at that point. And I believe against Sporting, the crowd increased a bit as well. So yeah, it's really interesting, all of these issues.
Yeah.
Well, we will leave our European adventure there, and we will come back onto it, I guess, in a few weeks' time when we play Sporting Lisbon. We will take a short break. We'll be back very soon.
At Starbucks, we've more than doubled parental leave for full and part-time baristas, giving them up to 18 weeks of paid time off, so they can be there for early bedtimes, late nights, first laughs, and spend more time with the best company they know. At Starbucks, benefits like parental leave are just the start. Learn more about Starbucks industry-leading benefits at starbucks.com/partners.
Hey, this is Bill Simmons from the Bill Simmons Podcast, here to help you make the most of your summer with Michelob Ultra, a superior light beer worth playing for. Play for it with the guys when you're competing to see who can sink more birdies on the golf course, because winning tastes even better with Ultra on the line. Play for Ultra. Fill your fridge with Michelob Ultra this summer. Enjoy responsibly. Copyright 2025 Anheuser-Busch Michelob Ultra Light Beer, St. Louis, Missouri.
Wish you could become a morning person? You know the type, up before the sun, early morning runs, first one to the office with donuts and a smile. How do they do it? easy with the new Galaxy Watch 8. Sleep tracking and personalized insights from Samsung Health help you improve so you can wake up to a whole new you. One who, dare I say it, skips the snooze? It's possible. Train your sleep with Galaxy Watch 8. Learn more at Samsung.com. Requires compatible Samsung Galaxy phone, Samsung Health app, and Samsung account.
Welcome back to Howe'er the podcast for part 3 of our On This Week episode, covering events from the 30th of September onwards, and we are on the 4th of October. Now, on the 4th of October 1912, we signed a goalkeeper called Joe Butler. The season hadn't got off to a great start. We'd played 6 games, drawn 2, and lost the other 4, and we conceded 16 goals in those 6 games. We signed Joe Butler, who was and Kelvin, you like this, he was a 5'9" goalkeeper. So if you were around in those days, he would have been a firm favourite of yours. Now, this lad didn't have, when you look at it on paper anyway, he didn't have a great deal of pedigree. You say he was 33 years old. He'd played for Stockport County, Clapton Orient, which was obviously Leyton Orient as was, Stockport County, and he spent the previous 4 seasons at Glossop, with Glossop North End. I think they dropped the North End off the name to avoid confusion with Preston. They were in the 2nd division. He'd never played top flight football before. Sunderland signed him for a fee of £3,000. He makes his debut away at Chelsea, and we get beat 2-0. So that's 7 games, only 2 points. I think we're 1 off the bottom of the league. He's then ever present for the rest of the season, conceding 27 goals in 32 games. Now, bear in mind, we conceded 16 in the first 6. To concede 27 and 32 is quite a remarkable run of form. And of course, this is the 1912-1913 season, so we end up winning the league. We're narrowly defeated in the FA Cup final. And he ends up with the best ratio of games played to goals conceded of any Sunderland goalkeeper. Technically, Mark Poom and John McLaughlin have subsequently got a better ratio, but they played at a lower level. So in terms of top flight goalkeeping, he has got the best ratio of anybody who's ever played in goal for Sunderland. Now, he played 79 games for the club, disappeared the season after, and played out his career at Lincoln City, Stockport County, and Macclesfield. So those games he played for Sunderland were the only top flight appearances he ever made, and he ended up getting a league winners medal, getting the best. It's essentially the best performance stats anyway for a Sunderland goalkeeper, and it's quite a remarkable one, isn't it? Because he's not a name that's too often talked about.
Leaps out at you. Yeah. Aye. I think that there was a lad called I think we did a little bit of work on our defence, but it wouldn't account for that fantastic uptick in form, given the lad comes in from literally second level football.
No, that's right.
What a story! I've never noticed that one before. Actually,
he signed. Yeah. He signed around the same time as a defender called Charlie Gladwin. But the two of them, the two of them are given a lot of credit for what subsequently happened that season. Now, the October the 4th is also a very famous day in Sunderland history, because in 1936 it was the birth of Charlie Hurley in Cork, and also in 1961 it was Jimmy Montgomery's debut as Sunderland played Walsall in the game that Brian Clough scored a hat-trick in. 1967, on October the 4th, it was Charlie Hurley's testimonial. Sunderland played a 5-5 draw against, and it was called the Charlie Hurley International 11. It was littered with international players from all over the place. Peter Bonetti, Eddie McCreary, Martin Peters, Bobby Moore, Jeff Hurst, Peter Osgood, Alan Hinton, Jimmy McNabb were among the names who lined up in opposition for Sunderland. Colin Todd got a couple of goals. Charlie Hurley, of course, was on the score sheet along with Colin Suggett and George Cannell. It was a 5-5 draw. Bobby Moore, Martin Peters, with 2, and Alan Hinton with 2 got the goals in return. Now, on October the 4th, 2003, Andrew, last week you left us with a quiz question, and it was related to this particular game.
Yes, we played Sheffield United on that date. We were away at Sheffield United and we won, despite only having 10 men at the end of the game. So we asked who scored the goal. We won 1-0, so it was the only goal of the game, and which Sunderland player had been sent off. The scorer, does any of you want to have a stab at that one?
I've got it in. Yeah, I've got it in front of me, so I'll say Kevin Kyle.
Chris, phenomenal knowledge. Well done. You could have got away with that one. But yeah,
I'll own up to cheating.
Fair dues. Yeah, Kevin Kyle got the winner, and it was Julio Walker that was sent off quite late on. He picked up a second yellow card of the game. And I remember this time pretty well because we went into that season on the back of a horrific relegation. We went to a club mentioned already, Preston North End, and I think we needed to avoid defeat to either stop us equaling or breaking Darwin's worst record of consecutive league losses. We won the game, and then suddenly Mick McCarthy picked things up, and by the time we played Sheffield United, we'd got ourselves into the playoff places. Kyle had scored the winner in a midweek game at home to Ipswich Town. So to go from the absolute pits to now be back in the promotion hunt was a phenomenal achievement. And Chris, I was going to ask you, with it being in Sheffield, was that too early for you, or had you settled in Sheffield by that point in 2003?
No, I'm not that old, mate. Don't worry about that. I was at Union Leicester at that point. But
well, I didn't know. You could have been at uni in Sheffield. I didn't know if that was a game you would have got to or had any stick off your neighbours from, but obviously not.
I was at that game. I remember that game. I was at Bramall Lane that game. Remember Kevin Kyle scoring in front of the away fans. The far post diving header or something.
Well, yes, it was a header, and he is a boring stat for years. It was the only time my wife has ever had a bet on football, and she bet on Sunderland to win 1-0, Kevin Kyle to score the goal. So that's a pretty good record.
I would be encouraging that. I think I would be encouraging a bit more of that, man.
I think she would admit it was beginner's luck. So yeah. She went out on a high. That's the best way to put it.
Also on October the 4th in 2014, Gus Poyet's team beat Stoke City 3-1 in the Premier League. Connor Wickham getting 1 and 2 goals for Stephen Fletcher. And a year later, Dick Advocat resigned for the second time in the space of a few months. Said he was going to retire, put his feet up, and to date he's had 8 more jobs. 2022, we had a game against Blackpool, and Edouard Michou made his debut for the club in that game. And 2024, so this time last year, it was a game where Alan Brown performed some voodoo magic on the ball in injury time against Leeds United to squirm a goal in the very closing stages of that game to rescue a point. Now, also on October the 4th, back in 1997, now we talked earlier about Peter Reid's departure in 2002 and the strange timing of that. 5 years earlier, if Peter Reid had been given the push, it might not have been as surprising because it is the infamous nightmare at Ellen Park, Chris.
It is, and it's one of these defeats actually that is, I suppose, quite famous among Sunderland fans. So when you talk about defeats, we might think ones in derbies that hurt and things like this, but this one comes up a lot, and it comes off the back of that relegation, of course, last season at Roker Park. And we've talked about it before. I remember we talked about the move to the Stadium of Light, and we all talked about this weird feeling in that summer, especially when I remember going to the last ever game at Roker Park against Liverpool, and there being this really odd atmosphere about the club at the time because everyone was sad about leaving Roker Park. We just got relegated when I think a lot of people thought, why? Like, why have we just been relegated? Because we finished on 40 points and we were almost there, and there was the injuries we had. People were questioning whether, did Peter Reid not spend the money he was given? Was he actually given money in the first place? We talked about buying the likes of Waddle on answer deadline day for 70,000. So all this was in the mix to make this really weird atmosphere. And then, we hoped that the last season of Roker Park would have this fairy tale ending, and then it never actually happened in the end. And well, you could argue that in that summer the relationship between the club and fans were a bit strained. That there was problems with tickets. That I think people weren't sold on the names of the naming of the stadium. That people weren't convinced about the changing of the badge. There was all of this. It all kind of went into the pot, and that Peter Reid was going to work on rebuilding the squad. That he brought in Kevin Phillips, Lee Clark broke the transfer record for $2.5 million, I think it was. Edwin Zotebeer came in to challenge Lionel Perez at the time, and a young lad called Chris Byrne came in. But Sunderland fans weren't that excited by Kevin Phillips at all to start with, especially when the rumours were going around that we actually wanted David Connolly and didn't get him, and David Connolly was the higher profile player. And, we had this big spectacle of the Ajax game, and actually I remember everybody being excited about Chris Byrne out of all of the signings at that game. He was flying. And then we went into the Sheffield United game at the start of the season, and there was two players in the starting 11 to make his debut. Chris Macon and Lee Clark came in. And we went to a good Sheffield United side on that first day of the season. But we had, and I think Kevin Phillips was suspended, if I remember rightly.
Yeah.
And we played one player, we played 5-1. We played Niall Quinn up front on his own. Michael Bridges was on the bench, and that really changed things up at half time. But we played 4-5-1, and we got played off the park. We were awful. We played in those gold strips. It was a sweltering day. It was live on Sky, and we just thought, oh no, here we go. We're kind of, if we kind of had our moment in the sun with Peter Reid, that unbelievable promotion. But then we came back to the opening game at the Stadium of Light, which was again another spectacle. And this was the first time that we saw Quinn and Phillips up front together. And it was clear though that Niall Quinn wasn't fully fit. That he just didn't look on it at all. And I remember in that game, people think of that night against Manchester City, but we weren't great that night. Alan Kernigan got sent off after 25 minutes. And before then, he'd absolutely gifted a goal to Niall Quinn. He played it across the face of the box, and Niall Quinn slotted it in an empty net with his left foot. But we logged away, and they actually equalised with 10 men with 15 minutes to go. Kincladze got a penalty, clumsy foul by Kevin Ball. And we really struggled in that game, and it was two late goals in the last 5 minutes or so from Phillips and Lee Clark that got us all 3 points. So everyone was celebrating that win, but Manchester City as well. Manchester City got relegated that season, so it was a really crap Manchester City side. So it wasn't like everybody was celebrating. And then we went away to Port Vale, got thumped 3-1, and then I remember the Norwich City game, and this one was the reason now, kids, why we've got a tunnel that pulls out onto the way onto the pitch, because we got beat 1-0. I think it was a goal from Ashley Ward from memory. And I always remember I was sitting in the North Stand that day, and Niall Quinn went clean through on goal. And he says this in his book, actually, but he tries to basically slot it home, and he just almost passes it into the goalkeeper's hands. And he said in his book, he just realised he had absolutely no power in his knee. He just could not hit the ball, and there was a problem. And basically, that's essentially, I think he played the next game and came off as sub, and that was pretty much it. I think that was kind of the last we saw of him. but we got a few wins under our belt, and then we were still around mid-table, and we ended up, after winning 3 and drawing 1, we went on a half-decent run, but then we played Middlesbrough at home. And this is a real strange one, because you think of that Peter Reid era, you think Quinn and Phillips, you think of Danny Diccio and Michael Bridges kind of underneath them. But in this game against Middlesbrough, we played Martin Smith up front on his own at home to Middlesbrough, and we got beat 2-1. Kevin Ball got a consolation goal in the last minute. And they had players like Mikkel Beck, Paul Merson, Adam Townsend, Gianluca Festa, Emerson was playing for them. They had a good side, and they were good all season. But we just looked way off it. Martin Smith up front on his own. Quinn was missing. Phillips got injured in one of those games as well. So he was missing. Bridges wasn't quite trusted by Peter Reid still at this point. So even though we didn't really, Martin Smith was a cracking player, but you wouldn't stick him up as a lone striker. And we did it that game, and Middlesbrough kind of beat us. So we dropped down to 11th, dropped down to mid-table, and everyone's thinking, oh, right, well, we'll get back on it. We're going to Reading away, Terry Bullivant's Reading at Elm Park, as Martin's already said, in a team, actually, we mentioned him earlier on, but Phil Parkinson, I mentioned him twice on this podcast now. I didn't mean to, but there you go. Was in the Reading side, and actually Ray Houghton was in the Reading side. We always liked as a player, but it's this thing that at the time Peter Reid was in this. He was in this flux between trying to trust players that he trusted before and trying to find out what this new side looked like, because he still, basically from the promotion season, the season before the one or this one that got us promoted, he went into this Reading game with Perez in goal, who came in the Premier League, Chris Macon, new signing at right back, but then the rest of the back four was Richard Ord, Andy Melville and Martin Scott. Now, there's two things to this, that Peter Reid still wanted to rely on these players who took him up the season before last. But the other thing, Richard Ord and Andy Melville were playing these games while carrying injuries. And he was basically forcing them into carrying on and playing for him. Because I think half the problem was he didn't think he had any understudies. And in midfield, we had Darren Williams, who actually played on the right, Lee Clark, Kevin Ball, Mickey Gray on the left. But again, we come to the striking positions. Kevin Phillips was on the bench for this game. And up front, we had Martin Smith and John Mullen. So you can see that Peter Reid just didn't really have a clue at this point what his best side was. He was frantically trying to get us on the fly to get us back into this kind of second tier mode and find what his best 11 was to get us going. So we went to Reading, and there was just under 11,000 there. And after 16 minutes, Carlos Saba put us through. And I remember rightly, it was just a long ball over the top, and he just kind of ran on it and slotted it home. And he passed Lionel Perez fairly easily. Then he made it 10 minutes later, and he was unlucky not to score his hat-trick just before half-time. But we kind of survived that in a way, that we should have been 3-0 down. And actually, Lionel Perez had to make a couple of smart saves to kind of help us along and not go into half-time with the game completely finished. You can imagine Peter Reid gave some stern words at half-time. And unfortunately, it happened just on the hour mark. And this is where things kind of started getting a bit nasty, because it was a really awkward kind of a mistake from Chris Macon. He tried to do a back pass while kind of falling over the ball, and I think it was Martin Williams went through and made it 3 for Reading, and then it was only 4 minutes later James Lambert made it 4, and the Sunderland fans were obviously going mad. But then 3 minutes later it got even worse. Darren Williams got his second yellow card and got sent off. And then just to rub things in, Sunderland fans actually had a bit of something to cheer about when we put the ball in the back of the net. But it was actually a fan It was a Sunderland fan who ran onto the pitch and stuck the ball in the back of the net and shouted at the players, "That's how it's done." Things got that bad. But I'm saying that in a jovial way, but actually at the game in the away end, there was things started to get a bit aggressive and get a bit nasty. And as the team kind of boarded the team coach after the game, there was the calls for Peter Reid's head. Players and management were spat on. The Thames Valley Police made a number of arrests on Sunderland fans who went crazy at the Sunderland squad getting back on the coach. And it was you could say it was a bit of a turning point. You could argue that we won, we went to Middlesbrough in the League Cup, got beat. But then in the next game against Huddersfield, Jody Craddock came in, but he was playing alongside Richard Ord. We beat them comfortably. Kevin Phillips came back in. But we only won 2 of the next 6 and we drew the other 4. But the last one of that run of 6 was when Niall Quinn returned, which I always think is the actual turning point when he returned from injury. But people go back to this Reading game and say this was a real catalyst. And I think if you put it in the plot, people sometimes look back on this and go, "Oh yeah, that Reading game, that's where everything turned." It wasn't quite as simple as that. No. But I think it was the first marker that went down. It was the first catalyst that changed everything. And you could argue, if this defeat didn't happen, that, does the next 2 years then go on, or 3 years or whatever it was after that happened. But we're talking about Peter Reid not getting sacked when he did, and I remember speaking to John Ficklin about this, saying, was there any ever discussion, thought or whatever to pull the plug on Peter Reid at this point? And straight away, without he didn't take a breath, he just went, absolutely not. He went, we knew we were heading in the right direction. This was just a blip. This was just a bad run. And he said, we never spoke about it. It wasn't even considered, which is brilliant in a way. You have faith and the manager gets it right. But I tell you what, losing the 3 out of the first 4 now after relegation, that you'd really have to get back on it and get some results. But it's funny to think that before everything that happened, those 2 7th place finishes, how much pressure Peter Reid was actually on. And, you're talking people spitting at the squad that, however many months later, everyone would have been at Wembley cheering them on and saying they're the best thing in sliced bread. But yeah, that's football, isn't it?
It's always interesting when you look back on that run of results after the Reading game, because as you rightly say, people kind of look at that Reading game as a turning point. But I actually don't think it was. I think it was the lowest point that we got to, and we emerged back from it. But as you say, we only won 2 out of the next 6. You've got the Quinn comeback against Forest, but then the game after that, the 7th game after that, was the debut of Nicky Summerby, which was the away game at Portsmouth. Did we have the injury to Martin Smith, who was playing on the left? He came off at half-time. Summerby came on. Alan Johnston, who was on the right, who'd never been deployed on the left before, got switched over. And all of a sudden, these sort of things fall into place. Later on, we had an injury to Martin Scott. I think, was that before that or after that? But around that time, we had an injury to Martin Scott, which forced him to put Mickey Gray at left back. So some of these things coincided. And we've talked many times in this podcast, haven't we, about those little moments that are maybe out the manager's hands, but are looked at as either great decisions or turning points or things that just kind of transpired to go really well for the club. And I think in the space of maybe 6 weeks, we had a number of things happen that season that were probably outside of Peter Reid's control, really, but subsequently combined to help us achieve great things.
Yeah, you're absolutely. You can go through them. You can say, Melville's injured, Richard Ord gets injured, Martin Scott gets injured, Quinn comes back at the perfect time, then Martin Smith gets injured so that Summerby and Johnson switch. All these things that Peter Reid just reacted to rather than make a genius technical decision. Because like you said, you look at that Portsmouth game, I talked about the back 4 of being Macon, Scott, Ord and Melville. That Portsmouth game where you could say the flip really happened, he's got Darren Holloway, Mickey Gray, Jody Craddock and Darren Williams. It's completely changed within the space of, like you say, 4 or 5 weeks.
Yeah.
And all of it because of a consequence of something happening rather than making tactical decisions.
I think you're right in that the Reading game does get viewed as that turning point, but it's not. It's the point where we're at our lowest, which is slightly different. As you say, within a few weeks' time, that the team is completely different. One thing I would say, that the spitting, however, what we're doing there, man, we're meant to be brilliant fans. That's nae good, spitting at the players, no matter how bad they've played.
I started talking about that Norwich game, but in the tunnel. But before, they just had everybody walking into the concrete bit, walking right in, and that's when they realised they'd made a mistake, that people could lean over and spit at the players. So it actually started then that season when people were spitting on the players after that Norwich game.
Yeah, crazy. But yeah, the Reading game is still important, and I think you're right. It's because we've lost so heavily, the nature of the defeat. Because, by the way, I've just checked there as you were taking us through that. Reading ended up finishing the season rock bottom. So it wasn't even like we'd been torn apart by one of the stronger teams.
Yeah.
But that was what necessitated, whatever the word is. Necessitated.
I'll give you that one. I'll give you that one.
Thank you very much. That's what's brought in the likes of Craddock to become a regular, and the lad we were talking about earlier, Darren Holloway, who previously had been on an unnamed sub on the bench a couple of times. He's then named on the bench again in the next league game, and then makes his debut. So, just lot of factors.
There's lots of things, isn't there? There's Mickey Gray coming in as well.
Yeah.
You know, I think I always tended to see that. You put it into words the way that I see that Reading game as the lowest point. It's the point from which you're just thinking things cannot get any worse. I wonder if that's where Reid's at. We need to change it. Things can't get worse. But he actually is still reacting rather than responding to these circumstances that happen. When you think how quickly Summerby and Johnson found their feet on those wings, and then Mickey Gray coming in, and that relationship working really quickly with Johnson down that left hand side. I mean, you couldn't have if he'd honestly said to us, "I've got this plan because I know these two will play. I know this will work." You would have said, "Boy, yeah, brilliant lad." But that it was a happenstance. All that, but it was a glorious happenstance when you think about where it took us.
Yeah, and we're talking about.
Was it?
Sorry, go on, Kelvin.
I'd nothing more sensible to say other than how glorious it all was.
Because, well, I was going to say we're talking about attendances earlier. So that Man City game had 38,000 there for that opening league game at the Stadium of Light. The next home game after the Reading game was Huddersfield Town at home, and 24,000 there at the Stadium of Light, which, again, your mind immediately, you say Peter Reid era, and I go back to that with my rose-tinted spectacles on and think, it was all kind of roses and brilliant football and goals and all this. 24,000 turning up against, to say, Huddersfield Town, and I was one of them that day, and 24,000 felt like the stadium was empty at the time. And this was Peter Reid trying to turn things around.
And it was a funny thing, that, Chris, because I was there with my brother at that game, and we had that conversation driving. I was going back over the border and dropped him off in Newcastle, and it was one of the things that was spoke about was this new ground's great, but my God, when it's only half full, it's surreal. The atmosphere was really, really odd. If you put 24,000 into Roker Park, where would been the season before, it was quite raucous. You were rubbing shoulders with people, but 24,000 in the Stadium of Light, not good. Not good.
24,000 at Roker, you would have had 3,000 locked out the season before.
That's right.
Yeah, right. Actually, yeah, of course.
Now
I can well remember that.
Earlier in this podcast, I don't know why or how we got into the subject of burnt ass. Andrew made some scurrilous rumours about him. But
I have double checked. We are safe. The incident has happened, so I've not said anything I shouldn't have done.
No. I've also double checked, and I can confirm that. The other things I found out about burnt ass, as an aside, whilst double checking that scurrilous rumour about a webcam and a West Brom fan's wife, was his song at West Brom went to the tune of Go West by the Pet Shop Boys, and it was burnt ass shouldn't light his farts. which is quite catchy. I'm a bit disappointed at the time we didn't think of that one.
Well, Chris, I'm struggling to place the tune. You couldn't sing that for us, could you?
I'm not going to sing it anyway, so there you go. But also, around the same time as the incident that Andrew alluded to, it was West Bromwich Albion Christmas party, and burnt ass went dressed as Robin Hood, ended up getting too drunk, had to get rushed to hospital, dressed as Robin Hood to get seen to. So I think, by all accounts, Brian Robson saw this defender getting stretched out drunk in tights and thought, this fella probably isn't for me. So he got rid. And we have got one more day to cover in this week's episode, and it is October the 5th. We've already celebrated the birth of Charlie Hurley on October the 4th in 1936, and just 10 years later, on October the 5th, Dave Watson was born, another great Sunderland centre-half.
Nevin in there, I mean, two fantastic centre-halves, weren't they? God, we were blessed to have both of them play for us. But I always felt Hurley came from a different era to Watson. Quite often they get compared. Now, I always had them as different kinds of centre-halves. But I always loved, Charlie Hurley. He was quick in the head, and he had a terrible start, His first game, we got beat 7-0. His second game, we get beat 6-0. And Charlie Somerville, the Sunderland Echo reporter, he could be a bit sort of pithy, him, at times. And I know he comes to, it's Hurley that tells the story. He sees Somerville coming and he think, here we go. I'm going to get skewered here for my game. And Somerville asks him, what's going on? Can't remember the question he asked. And Hurley obviously saw him coming and says, he was quoted. He says, in fairness, between the 7-0 defeat and the 6-0 defeat, you've already seen an improvement. He's still, comparatively speaking, a young lad, Hurley, at the time. You credit him with a good bit of wit, I think, in that situation. I thought that was just a funny little thing to throw in there.
You've stolen my thunder there, because on October the 5th, on Dave Watson's 11th birthday, Charlie Hurley made his debut for Sunderland. So there you go. So that's that 7-0 defeat at Blackpool. 1984 was the birth of Kenwyn Jones, who, of course, played centre forward for us, signed by Roy Keane from Southampton. And in 1991, Anton Rogan, Irish defender who we signed from Celtic, made his debut at home for Sunderland against Brighton and Hove Albion. And we were 2-1 down at half-time, went on to win 4-2. And just to join a few threads up from different things that we've talked about, Sunderland's first goal of that day was scored by Peter Reid, who celebrated with his trademark double somersault. Now, the thing I remember, or two things I remember most about this game, apart from how brilliant Peter Reid was, both revolve around Brighton. First of all, it was the first time I'd ever seen a team play in striped shorts. They had an all-striped kit, including the shorts, and they were sponsored by Nobbo, which, as a 13-year-old, I found pretty funny. The other thing from that game was John Byrne played for Brighton, and he scored for the away side. We'd sold Marco, so again, if you join the threads up for this one, We'd sold Marco Gabbiadini the week before, as we talked about last week. David Rush, I think, got Marco's number 10 shirt and scored 2, if I'm remembering that game correctly. But John Byrne had already been linked with a move to replace Marco, so everybody was kind of watching John Byrne. And, of course, he goes and scores quite a nice goal for Brighton in the Fulwell end.
And how many times were we linked with Johnny Byrne as well over the piece? I'm sure when he was at York, we were not linked with him as well.
I can't remember if we were linked with him when he was at York, because Dennis Smith was his manager at York, and when Dennis Smith came to Sunderland, we were linked with him when we were in Division 3, because he was a QPR. I think he went... Did he go to Le Havre? He went to Le Havre in France, didn't he? And we were linked with him again when we went up to replace Eric Gates. Instead, we signed Peter Davenport because we couldn't quite get that one over the line. I think we were also linked with him at some point for him to partner Marco. So of course that would be in that season when Eric Gates retired. But yeah, it was
going back to that 1991 when we went up. Dennis Smith was desperate to get him before Davenport, like you said, and actually. When you read what happened later, they had a conversation, and John Byrne wasn't aware. His agent didn't tell him that Dennis Smith wanted to sign him.
It was during Italian 90, wasn't it?
Yeah, and so Dennis Smith had put a bid in and wanted him, and nobody told John Byrne about it. And it's funny because he talks about when they started off at York, and Dennis Smith went there as he went there on loan to start with. And he said, and then they asked him in the summer to take over as player manager. And he said there was this. He said it was just this blonde kid kind of playing with the ball, and he thought he looks half decent, but he wasn't training. And he said, "What's wrong with him? Why is he not training?" And so apparently, he said, "Oh, he's allergic to grass." And at first, he thought they were taking the mick, like, "Oh, so he doesn't train well." But no, he said he's actually allergic to grass. So Dennis had to help him get sorted, so to sort his allergies out, so he could train with the team and all this. And he said after that, he said he found a brilliant player who ended up playing in the top flight for QPR and all.
Oh, well, that might explain why he went to QPR with their plastic pitch.
Yes.
Yeah. That's a story not to be sneezed at either, is it? Jesus.
But yeah, you do wonder, would he have been the perfect foil for Marco in the top flight? And it's interesting. This game you talked about, the Brighton game, he scored after 4 minutes, but then he was hooked with about 25 minutes to go. But you do wonder. I think because of the gap, you look at the timings. I think we'd already put a bid in for him.
Well, I seem to remember he got quite a good ovation from the Sunderland supporters when he went off. Because I think we all knew that all things being equal, he'd very soon be a Sunderland player finally. And I think obviously we'll come on to this in a podcast in a week or two's time, but I think by the time we next played at home, he was wearing red and white.
But David Rush put a good stake in, didn't he, that day?
He did.
Yeah. Just a word about Anton Rogan. Did you like him, lads?
I did. I really liked Josh, as they call him.
Yeah, Josh. Yeah. He was I quite liked him as well. I'd seen him play for Celtic, so I kind of had a sense of what he was about as well. But I liked him. But one thing that really sort of, whenever we talk about him, it's a visual that always pops into my head. He played in the quarter-final game at Stamford Bridge. Me and my brother went down to that game. Do you remember it? I mean, it was a hell of a game, that. And there was loads went off outside the ground, inside the ground, on the pitch. It was a feisty bloody game, but we actually played as a team really well, and he played really well. And I always remember them coming out to applaud the away fans in the heat of battle, when you think about all the fancy gear the players wear underneath their strips and that. And he's got his Marks and Sparks white vest on. It tickled me, a young'un, when we were outside getting bricks eyed at by the Chelsea fans. And I swear to God, we walked down the street with dustbin lids on our heads because they were high in blooming bricks over the building site what we were laughing about was Anton with his bloody marks and spots. That's done.
For some reason, he had to change his shorts at the side of the pitch for some reason, didn't he? I'm sure.
He did. Aye. Yeah, and he had his white marks and sparks undies on as well.
See, there must be something about Sunderland players changing shorts at Stamford Bridge, because I can remember Kevin Kilban changing his shorts right in front of us in a game at Stamford Bridge at one point, and he definitely had white. I can't confirm the brand, Kelvin. Didn't get that close, but they were definitely white anyway. So there you go. I think that's probably quite a... Sorry, go on.
Me and Bernd Haas were interested in that kind of thing. You see, so.
Well,
there's your ending button.
That is definitely a suitable point to wrap this one up. So thank you to Andrew, thank you to Kelvin, thank you to Chris for another very short, epic of a podcast. Andrew, do you have a question for the listeners to ponder on if they've got this far?
Yes, I'm dreading this episode coming out. I mean, some of the areas we've gone into today, I don't know what's come over us. This is meant to be a history podcast, and it's gone into all sorts of avenues. Yes, the question for next week, which will be the period 6th to the 12th of October. We've already mentioned a few big birthdays today for really popular Sunderland players. So this one, short and simple, 9th of October, this future Sunderland player was born in Hendon. Now, who is that? I've gone low in terms of clues because I think a fair few people might be able to get it just with the information, and no doubt we'll have a good old chat next time about this individual.
Excellent. That sounds good. So, in between now and then, keep an eye on the podcast feeds because we have got a new podcast for you to listen to every single day. And remember to check out rokerreport.sbnation.com for all sorts of Sunderland content, including every day an On This Day article for you to relive a moment of Sunderland history. So thank you to everybody who's listened. We'll be back with another episode of On This Week next week. But until then, it's goodbye from all of us.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.